Good morning. Welcome to the Environment and Economy Overview and Scrutiny Committee, Tuesday 10th of February. Okay, if we can move on to agenda item 1, apologies.
Chair, I've only had one note of a change to the amendment to the committee today, which is the substitute for Councillor David Coggins-Cogan, it should be Councillor Andrew Parkhurst.
Thank you. Agenda item 2, any declarations of interest, including whipping declarations? Councillor Pearce.
Sir, I've got an apology in that there's a Governance and Audit Committee meeting at 2 o'clock and I'll have to leave for that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Healy. Councillor Rose.
Just the declaration for I'm a member of Theatre Clwyd online on agenda item 11.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Pearce.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Agenda item 7, Pride in Place, it does mention Buckley. I'm a member of Buckley Town Council, so I just declare a personal interest in this particular item. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bithell.
Also got to leave the meeting by 1 o'clock because I got another meeting of the Wales Pensions Panel at 2 o'clock. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Agenda item 3, minutes of to confirm as a correct record the minutes of the meeting held on the 13th of January 2026. I shall go through them page at a time. Page 5, page 6, 7, 8, 9. Whenever confirm, move that they're correct. Moved, seconded, and all those in favour. That's carried. Thank you very much. Agenda item 4, urgent matters as agreed by the chairs. I've agreed to allow Councillor Pearce wishes to come in on a comment.
All right, thank you, Chair. Sorry to indulge on your agenda item 4, but I do need to raise the point that I'm unhappy with the length of time it's taking for officers to respond from the council, particularly street scene. I'm not going to name any names, but we did look at this some time ago, and I know the Chief Officer is looking into improving response times. But I think you'll find that waiting a month or more for a response is not reasonable. So can the scrutiny just note that it's been raised, and we will ask the officer just to keep her eye on the situation. And I know that she says to update her if these happen, but I think she just needs to know it's happening on a regular basis. But I do have to say, when we report the missed bins, that department is very prompt. So I'll leave it at that, Chair, but I will give the officer a copy of the email that I'm referring to, and we'll take it from there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Just also at this point, I've been asked if we can change the agenda slightly because of meetings that are being held this afternoon, to see whether we could bring in the toilet outcome of the consultation on public toilets forward, as well as the review of the car parking charges. Does anybody have any objections if we bring those 2 agenda items forward to after agenda item 6? No? Okay, well, that's fine. So we'll okay. So can you stay longer, or? Okay, that's fine then.
Sorry, Chair, we can't hear online in the chamber. Whoever was talking alongside you.
Okay, thank you. It was just a question whether the officers could stay long enough for the change in the agenda, and they can, so we shall carry on. Agenda item 5 is the forward work programme. I'll hand over to Steve.
Thank you, Chair. So one of the subs today was actually myself for Margaret, who's not very well today. So apologies for me being here today. I will have to do a high-level view of the full work programme and action tracker because I've not been familiar with the detail behind a lot of it. So if members want to raise anything specific, then I'm happy to take questions on the report. Just to draw a few pointers. In March, the members of this committee will be invited to a meeting with the Education Committee that looking at, I think it's a school transport task and finish group, or there's this meeting in reporting to the committee in March. So you will receive an invitation to that meeting as well, just for that item, because that's the conclusion of that piece of work, hopefully. Moving on to the Appendix 1 on the forward work programme. In June, the fly tipping that's marked for July will actually come to the June meeting, so it was been popped in the wrong month. That will be coming to June, and there is an item missing from the March for items, which is land ownership. That will come to the March meeting as well. On the action tracker, there's quite a number of ongoing items which, on review, are quite likely to have been closed off. So rather than go through piecemeal, I will take an action myself to look through those and sort of provide an update to committee that where they are completed. But if members have any questions on specific items on the full work programme or action tracker, I'm happy to take questions, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Any questions on the forward work programme or action tracking? Okay, that's fine. So that's just the recommendations on page 11. Can I have a mover for those recommendations? Moved, seconded. A show of hands, those in favour. That's carried. Thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item 6, which is the council fund budget 26-27. And can I hand over to Gary?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Morning, members. We're now reaching the latter stages of our budget planning for the 2026-27 financial year, and the main budget setting meeting is scheduled for the 24th of February, so just a couple of weeks away. And this is the second in a series of reports to be presented to relevant overview and scrutiny committees over the next few days. Just by way of brief background and a reminder, the Welsh Local Government Provisional Settlement was announced back in November, and a summary of the key headlines and impacts on our budget planning was set out in a report to Cabinet and Corporate Resources Overview and Scrutiny Committee in December. That report advised of a minimum remaining budget gap still to be found of 9.519 million, which the Council will need to bridge to enable it to set a legal and balanced budget for the 26-27 financial year. We then received the final settlement on the 20th of January, and this included additional funding following a budget announcement on the 9th of December. And our allocation arising from this was an uplift of 4.1% from 2.3% at the provisional stage, and this contributes an additional 5.219 million to our overall budget position compared with the December report. However, this additional funding will not be sufficient to meet the previously reported budget gap and the ongoing impact of increasing service demand in areas such as social care and education additional learning needs. Therefore, portfolios have been revisiting their cost base with a view to identifying potential budget reductions of up to 3%, and the options identified by the place and growth portfolio and street scene and transportation portfolio are included within this report for consideration in advance of budget setting. And the report also updates on some other adjustments that are relevant to these portfolios. So perhaps at that point, Chair, I'll just hand over to, is it place and growth first, David? I'll hand over to David.
Thank you, Gary. Morning, members. So in terms of the budget pressure for place and growth, that equates to £235,000. And members will be aware there has been ongoing shrinkage in headcount over the last few years, which makes it difficult to make further headway in that regard. Although that there are some proposals there which I'll go through in a minute. But the main focus, given the difficulty with headcount, is on improving our income generation. And the first proposal relates to development management and planning fees. And members may be aware that there has been a 10% uplift in planning fees from December last year. and we consider that a £100,000 increase in income is a realistic proposition, given that our trend is around £1.2 million per year. So if you do the maths, 10% of 1.2 is actually above the £100,000 that we have proposed as a realistic increase in our income for planning fees. The second proposition is an increase in our building control fees, and we're proposing a £25,000 increase arising from the review of those fees. We consider that to be realistic. Our building control fees haven't been reviewed for some years now, and are obviously due a reassessment. So again, we're confident that the 25,000 uplift is a realistic proposition. We are mindful that consultants work in this field as well, so we're mindful that any uplifts in our fees are price sensitive. But equally, the reputation and trust of our building control team isn't to be underestimated in that regard either. The third source of additional income is through the investment zone, which does come with an element of revenue, and the proposition there is £30,000. Again, we're confident that that's deliverable, given the monies allocated by the investment zone, which are significant. Moving on, moving on to the headcounts. There are two areas where we are able to propose some savings. One is in our technical support area, and a reduction there, given that an officer has reduced their hours. So we're confident that we can take that as a saving without impacting on the service. And the second is within the Access and Natural Environment Service. Again, we will be reallocating some roles and responsibilities there, taking advantage of a retirement that has already been agreed. So they are combined. We're confident that we'll reach that £235,000 budget pressure target for this coming year, and happy to take any questions that you may have. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Biddle and then Councillor Lloyd.
Yes, thank you. The first question really is to Gary. There's been a request there for a reduction of 3% across the board, really, from various portfolios. What would that be hoped to produce in monetary terms? Could you tell us that, please? What sum is being looked for, really, by that 3% cut across the board? Do we have an overall figure for that, please? Sorry.
Yeah, I'll have to dig that figure out, Councillor. I'll get back to you. Okay.
Secondly, really, and just again to the Chief Officer for Planning, do the planning fees mentioned there also include the doubling of the fee for retrospective applications? I think we were asking for triple fees, really, for retrospective applications, but I don't think we got anywhere with that with Welsh Government, but we're prepared to increase it to double the charge, and again, we welcome that. Does that include that? Does the budget also cover an additional enforcement officer? That's been a budget pressure for some time, and it's much needed. Does the budget actually cover that particular post? And lastly, we mentioned already the building control is in competition with the private sector. Will the increase in the costs actually enable us to be still competitive with the private sector and not lose business to them? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take those questions in reverse order, if that's okay. So, in terms of building control, yes, we've both mentioned now that the acknowledgement that we're in competition with the private sector, and at this moment in time, the fees are being reviewed, and they're being reviewed carefully in terms of one eye on what the private sector is charging. And as I said earlier, it is some time since we reviewed those fees, so we're confident that we're under within the market. But again, as I say, in terms of the proposals for those reviews, we will do our very best to make sure that we are price competitive. But equally, the feedback that we do constantly receive is that there is a strong element of trust in using local authority building control. The reputation's there, the reputation of the council. It's our building control team, hugely experienced, have an excellent reputation. So that does count for something as well in terms of when people are choosing. It's not just about price; it's about quality and reputation too. But having said that, we operate within a commercial world, and we do need to be price sensitive, so that the increase in fees isn't counterintuitive. We don't want to end up with less money on that, so we're very mindful of that. So to give you that reassurance that those fees will obviously take that into account. In terms of the enforcement officer post, that's accounted for within the budget. That was a successful budget pressure request, wasn't it? So that is within the overall budget for place and growth. And the last question relating to retrospective applications. As you know, the fees are set by Welsh Government. At this point, Welsh Government haven't doubled the fees for retrospective applications. We have picked them up on that, and my understanding is that they're still under review. And the cabinet member for planning has recently written to the minister making that point, that we are in full support and pushing for a minimum of a doubling of the fees for retrospective applications. So the feedback that I've had from Welsh Government is that's still under review, even though there's been an increase in fees across the board of on average about 10%, because the fees differ for different types of development, that is still under consideration. It's not absolutely dead in the water. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Pearce.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've gone through the figures. Previously in October, we were asking for the efficiencies in the portfolios that this scrutiny reviews, and we had the pressures, and we said we'd be getting efficiencies around this time, but we don't see the word efficiency. They're now budget reductions. So coming back to efficiencies, when we look at table 1, the only efficiencies I see is number 4 and number 5, which total £80,000 out of the whole portfolio. Table 1 and item 1, 2 and 3 are in fact extra income streams, and you can't class those as efficiencies. They are budget reductions, but budget reductions and efficiencies aren't quite the same. Councillor Bissell asked a question I was going to ask about what percentage of the cost base is 235,000. So perhaps if I can turn it around the other way, what would 3% of the cost base look like? That is the target that you would look at. So we don't have the figure for 235,000 against the cost base. So we must have a target. We must know what the 3% of the cost base is. And if we consider that item 4 and 5 are the only efficiencies for the portfolio at 80,000, what percentage would that look like against the cost base? Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Jones.
Yeah, it was just, I was just looking at my notes from a previous meeting, and it was 3% was 235,000 or 237,000. The budget for this place of growth being 7.911 million. So you would anticipated 235,000. So that's the figure that's been provided. Thank you. I think Gary will probably clarify that.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. We have just dug out the figures now. What we do is we adjust the overall budget because there are some elements which we just can't make savings from. For example, commission care, council tax reduction scheme, gate fees within street scene and transportation. So 3% of the adjusted figure, if you like, is around about 3.2 million. However, over the next few days, you will notice that the total cost savings and cost reductions put forward don't total 3.2 because in view of the scale of previous reductions, that just hasn't been possible in a safe and balanced way. And one example is street scene and transportation, where 3% of their adjusted figure would be well over £1 million. And as you'll see, that obviously there are some cost reductions suggested, but not at that scale, which I'm sure Katie will be able to expand on when we get into that item.
Very good. Chief Officer.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Pearce. And you're right in terms of the cost efficiencies. You know, they are what, a third of what we're proposing here in terms of meeting that 3%. And there's good reason for that. And the main reason, as I touched on in opening, really is around the ongoing pressure over, I guess, a 10-year period, certainly before my time at the council, in terms of getting as lean as we possibly can. And there is not an awful lot left in terms of efficiency, in terms of headcount, without having a serious impact on service delivery. So my role has been to try and meet that budget pressure with the least impact on service delivery. And why would we not do that? Why would we not try and be more commercial? Why would we not try and generate more income if that actually safeguarded and enabled us to maintain a decent level of service? It's becoming harder and harder from an officer point of view to deliver on demand and expectation. So the proposals in front of you, from my perspective, are the least worst options. They're the least damaging options for me to deliver the service that you as members quite rightly expect. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Dolphin, did you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you. I think we need to understand where we are with this department, place and growth. It runs with a minimum of headcount, really. The regeneration team, with our manager here today, is so small. It's a handful of people, and they're not all paid by the county council either. So that's something we need to remember. But they bring in millions and millions and millions of pounds. You think of some of the projects that are undergoing now, and they're going to be dealing with Pride in Place as well. That's coming up. So a massive amount of work done by very few people. You get to a stage where 3%. It's good to have a figure of 3%. But where can you cut that 3% when your department is being cut to nothing virtually already? Trees. We have an officer here to discuss trees today because it's on the agenda item. And everybody loves trees. I love trees. And they're really important to our society. But we have 2 people for the whole of the county. 2 people to take care of the whole lot. Well, it's an impossible task, isn't it? And you've got ash dieback disease and all the rest of it that's going with it, which is a massive to the UK at the moment. So I think sometimes we need to understand 3% is what we want cut, but sometimes those departments are so small, you can't cut 3%. You can try and cut, because that's what it is. And I'm glad we use the word cuts, because that's what they are, cuts. We're not where we were 20 years ago. There's less money, there's less people, and some of the bigger departments, maybe they can do 3%. I went to Old Tammy yesterday, and well, we're not going to go and have a meeting at the back of Wepper Park in the Environment Services shacks, basically behind there, because that's what they work out of. They haven't got offices really to speak of. So I think they've done brilliantly well, and I congratulate the Chief Officer and Stuart Bodding, who's here today, and Niall Waller and all their teams as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Drifting slightly away from that, Councillor Pearce.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I know what the cabinet member's saying, but it's not the scrutiny that set the 3%. The 3% is across the board. And what we've pretty much agreed is that the total efficiencies for place and growth is £80,000. We've noted that. But if we move forward 12 months and we're now being told that that is it, there's nothing else left, there's no more efficiencies. So 12 months' time is going to be interesting to see where we are. We may end up with no efficiencies at all. But then we would need to look very closely at the makeup of the department and then the explanation of why there are no efficiencies. So I'll leave it at that, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Healy.
Thank you, sir. I completely agree with Councillor Dolphin in what he's been saying about services already been cut into the bone, that it is a really painful experience that we've been through over more than a decade, and there is so very little left to give. And in the light of that, when we do look at what our cuts are, and I will refer to them as cuts, not efficiencies, that were, in particular, we are not renewing a member of staff in access and natural environment. I'm very much aware of the fact that that area has statutory obligations with regard to Section 6 biodiversity, rights of way, and other things as well. And what I want to ask the Chief Officer, how thinly are services now going to be spread across the county? And is he confident that we can actually deliver an adequate service? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Healy. And you'll have heard me refer to the least worst of the options, really. And you're right. And we've talked about this already, about ongoing cuts over a sustained period of time. And it becomes more and more difficult to deliver a service. But what we've proposed here today are very much the least worst options. And in terms of the countryside service, one of the proposals there is not to replace an officer and to share those responsibilities more widely. That will put pressure on the officers who do take on those responsibilities, but that's managed risk, and we're confident that we can do that. So these are all difficult propositions, and quite frankly, I'd be very happy not to be making any of these cuts. But the pressure is the pressure. We have a responsibility to deliver a balanced budget, not just for place and growth, but for the council as a whole, of course. Excuse me. And I'm confident that we've done that in a way which minimises the impact. That isn't to say that there won't be some impact, but that impact is manageable. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Can we move on to the street scene section of the report?
Thank you. Borodar, good morning, members. So in terms of our side of things, a 3% reduction in budget for us, if you exclude Park Adver, would be 1.173 million, which is a significant sum to find. There is limited scope in terms of those reductions, as you know, some of the easier low risk options have already been done. We've had significant historical savings on efficiencies and budget reductions made within the portfolio. Just last year, 2.837 million was taken out of our budget. The year before, we had 1.427 million taken out of our budget. So we're already very, very lean, and we do have resilience and capacity issues in some service areas, which we're also highlighting on the risk register. So all our options have been around focusing on increasing income generation and full cost recovery, maximising grants, looking at in-house service delivery where we can, bringing policies forward for reviews, to see if we can reduce standards. We're also reviewing discretionary services, as we're doing with the home to school transport policy at the moment, and we're looking at largely around cost avoidance and cost prevention. So you'll see the table 2, which is our table, and what the first item, which is the proposed increase in car parking charges. We're proposing a range of changes to both the tariffs for certain areas and permits, which is covered in the report that's following on from this report. That would bring us an increased income target by a further 75,000. Obviously, that's dependent on usage and footfall within the car parks, so that's something that's outside our control. But we've tried to be, we've tried to be prudent in terms of forecasting those figures, and we've also tried to forecast in a reduction of 25% footfall as well. So we're confident that we can achieve that with the changes that we're proposing. Items 2 to 4, if you remember, we brought a report to Scrutiny in November where we were reporting £1.47 million worth of cost pressures. We're pleased to say, mainly through the in-year action plan around the overspend, we've managed to remove 420,000 of the cost pressures. So items 2 to 4 are those cost pressures that we previously reported. And the reason we're doing that is we've tried to look at different ways of mitigating those. So there's been some changes in the markets as well. We're trying to broker materials through support through RAP Cymru and get better rates. So we've seen some increases in glass recently, which is helping us. We're also looking at grant funding. So we've put bids in to Welsh Government for capital funding to replace some of the plant and equipment, and also help with some of the costs of funding the recycling equipment as well, receptacles. So we're confident that those cost pressures can be mitigated, and then we would propose to remove them as a result. If I move on to the risks, so table 3, we've got obviously some further risks that are coming up as well. We've got a further cost pressure that we've putting back into the budget, if approved, of 53,000, which again follows. There's another report following on in, I think it's on item 9 of the agenda, where we would look to transfer those assets to the town and community councils, but obviously we need some time to be able to progress that. So we would still need some budget next year to continue maintaining the public conveniences. So that would be a one-off cost pressure that would only occur next year. We are still carrying some significant risks. We saw that Welsh Government waived the infraction fines for not achieving our statutory recycling targets in 21-22, but we still have the financial years 22-23 and 23-24 hanging over us, unfortunately. And those total 356,000 and 184,000 respectively. So we're meeting Welsh Government regularly to review those and make sure that we stay on track with our action plan as part of the resource and waste strategy that was approved. So we're hopeful that we're on the right tracks. We've got a report coming to you next month, obviously, on the recycling performance. Certainly the first 2 quarters, we've overachieved the 70%, and we're on track for quarter 3 as well. But again, until we've had news from the Welsh Government whether they're going to waive those, we don't know where we stand. We also have the issue with 24-25, where the target was increased to 70%. And again, we missed that target by some way as well. So again, it's a case of waiting to see what happens there. The Sustainable Waste Management Grant, pleased to say, we finally found out late December, early January, that we were getting the grant this year. And the value of the grant is 737,000. So that's helped our position significantly in year as well. We are told that we are likely to get the grant again next year, but they're going to make the criteria much stricter for all local authorities. So again, it's all around making sure we've got credible implementation plans in terms of achieving the recycling targets in place. So again, it'll be a case of waiting to see how that unfolds next year. The packaging, the extended producer responsibility funding, the PEPR as we call it. We've had news in the last week of what our funding levels will be next year. They've reduced that significantly, and the reason they've reduced it is because of us not achieving the recycling targets in 23-24. So the reduction, the year-on-year reduction for us is 1.9 million, which is a huge sum. So we'll only be getting £3 million of that funding next year, which again is obviously going to put pressure on us in terms of service delivery. And then finally, our further pressure for us is weather and storm costs. I mean, we've been fortunate, and touch wood, at the moment not to have had severe weather this winter. We've had a few named storms in terms of yellow weather warnings, but not to the scale of previous years yet. And we've had one snow event as well. So we've still got a few months to go yet before we hit the spring. But again, it's somewhere where it creates a pressure for us that's unknown. We are forecasting an overspend in year for winter maintenance due to the average number of turnouts. So again, we're keeping a close eye on those and monitoring very carefully. So thank you. That's it from me.
Okay. Any questions for Katie? Councillor Pearce?
Right. Thank you. Very similar to the growth in place, increasing parking charges, which is agenda item 11, is income generation. Just on the table there, Katie, 2, 3 and 4, it talks about the mitigation from various funding streams. I didn't quite pick up the funding streams. Is that external funding streams? Or okay, thank you. The motor insurance renewal, is that for all the vehicles?
Yeah, sorry, yes, I didn't cover the motor vehicle insurance. So there was a part 2 report, I think, brought through last month through CROSC around the insurance being renewed in a tender exercise that took place. So there's been some benefit through that renewal of 94,000, which obviously sits with fleet services within my portfolio. So that's how that's come about.
So that's quite encouraging that if we look across the piece, across the whole council, looking at insurance services, that perhaps there's some potential savings there. Going on into the report, I noticed on page 25, I think it is, the severe storm costs. The council no longer has a severe weather reserve as it was fully utilised. So does that leave us exposed, and is there any way that can be built up? And just finally, the comment that the Chief Officer made about Welsh Government effectively cutting the funding because of the missed recycling target, I think is a little bit unfair on the service and on the council itself, because I think the officers working with members and members of the public, Katie touched on the report coming next month about the exceptional turnaround in the recycling. So I think, in all credit to the service, they have turned it around. And for Welsh Government to say, well, yeah, but this is a penalty for something that happened previous. Well, I think there's mitigating circumstances to say, look, we've done everything we've done, we've turned it around, and we think it's unfair. So I think perhaps where the cabinet member and the chief executive can go back to Welsh Government with the officer and say, look, it's come to scrutiny. Scrutiny aren't happy that you're effectively fining us for something which happened in the past, which we've demonstrated that we can now turn around, and we have turned it around. So I think there is scope there, and I think that I would propose that we do that. We go back to Welsh Government and appeal that, and to get the funding that we need for the service. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Can I bring the cabinet member in, Councillor Banks?
Thank you, Chair. Well, first of all, just want to mention the motor insurance policy. Obviously, that's good news. That's been a good saving. Just wanted to talk about how disappointed I am about the extended producer responsibility being cut. I mean, this is an item that was brought in to push producers off about their responsibility, to push them so that they reduced the packaging that they're producing. There's been no real sign of that. You get the odd one where a little package might come with little or no packaging on it, but on the whole, the packaging that they're producing is still, if not more than it was originally. So to cut it, it sends total wrong sign out to all these producers, because now they'll be looking at this thinking we can just carry on as we are, because they're cutting the funding to them. So they must be thinking that they're changing their stance on it, and that we're right in what we're doing, producing, because they're the ones that's producing all this cardboard, and we're the ones that has to deal with it. And so that's, it's a real kick in the teeth for them to produce this, especially given the fact of how well the service is doing. It really couldn't be any worse timing for this. And everyone's really annoyed about this because it's a massive cut. It's nearly £2 million. It's huge. But on that, I just want to mention as well, I mean, it's been mentioned here about chief officers mentioned year on year where there's been cuts after cuts after cuts. I think we really are getting to the bottom of the barrel now, where if we had to cut anything else, it'd have to be major cuts into service, in a service that's already pretty much, I wouldn't say it's on its knees, because we're performing rather well right across the board with limited funding. But it's probably a time of thinking what we should be increasing the budget for this service as opposed to removing it. Thank you, Chair.
Katie, did you want to come back?
Yeah, if I may, I think we all share Councillor Pearce's concerns about the fairness of cutting the EPR funding. We are making representations to the WLGA about it, because, to be penalised for something from 3 years ago when we've made those significant service changes and put an action plan in place and adopted a new strategy does seem really, really unfair. So it does feel like we're being penalised. So we are certainly making those representations to Welsh Government and the WLGA. And can I just be clear though, it's UK government. It's DEFRA, not Welsh Government, who've cut the EPR funding.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Alan Marshall.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not a member of this committee, but I'd like to just ask a question to Street Scene Chief Officer regarding street lights repair and maintenance. The community councils own some of their own street lights and contracted out to Street Scene to repair and maintain them. I'm aware, because I'm on the community council, I'm aware that ours is only paying for repair of street lights. The contract that they have includes an annual fee per street lights to include electrical testing every 3 years. I haven't seen any bills for that for the past 6 years I've been on it. So maybe it's a source of income that the council is not getting. So I just wonder if the Chief Officer could look into that, please. Okay.
Chief Officer.
I'm not aware of the situation, so that's something I'll have to take outside the meeting offline. Sorry.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Rose.
Thanks, Chair. In terms of the fines from Welsh Government, is there a time limit within the legislation, or could this fine hit us 6 years down the line? Because that's something that concerns me in terms of holding something like that over our heads, given that the extended producer responsibility hit us so late as well. In terms of the reduction from the extended producer responsibility, is that a split of the fund being reduced in the ratio that we get, and the whole pot will go to other local authorities, or is that just a reduction to us and DEFRA save some funds? Which way round does that work, do you know? And within the legislation, there does say there's an appeals process, but it's not clear whether that appeals process is for the producers or for local authorities to use. Do we know whether that's allowable for us to appeal that as well? Thanks.
At the moment, it's a little bit too early to know around the ins and outs of the reductions to all the local authorities. So there's an exercise going on in the background through the WLGA to map out what the funding levels are like for all local authorities across Wales. Some, for all I know, some local authorities may not have seen the same reductions as us because potentially they were already meeting the 70% thresholds in 23-24. So I don't know, we don't know the scale of it at the moment. Again, my understanding is the reductions would, they don't go back to DEFRA. It's obviously it's the manufacturers producing the packaging that will benefit ultimately, is my understanding, because they're the ones having to pay into the fund to give it to local authorities. So it's a reduction in that. Though, we've brought previous reports around the deposit return scheme and EPR separately, and we've always said that it's not going to be a fund that's going to be guaranteed year on year, because those manufacturers are going to want to see reductions in costs because they're paying into the fund to produce those packaging item materials more sustainably. So instead of using plastic, they're moving to cardboard and so on, and paper. So they're going to want to see those reductions, and they also want to see penalties for local authorities where they're not achieving the targets. So that's my understanding. In terms of the appeals process, we're trying to work through that at the moment to work out how that might be done, whether it's going to be done on an all Wales basis or whether local authorities will do that individually. So that's still something yet to be addressed. Sorry, Chair, I noticed that Chantel Humphreys is also online, so I don't know if Chantel has got anything further, because she's been to a couple of the webinars as well.
Yeah, happy to add some commentary there. So just mainly to provide some reassurance, really, that during the sessions with WLGA and during CSS meetings, quite a few local authorities within Wales have been impacted by it. The modelling for the next financial year has changed, so hence why the difference in pricing. It's a really confusing process, and local authorities have asked for that direct contact with PAC UK to get further understanding of why there is such a difference. We've also challenged so the reduction is based on previous year. So we've challenged, does this mean that the infraction fine for that year is going to be waived? Because you could argue that we're being penalised twice. So all local authorities tend to be in the same boat with this one. Some have had a positive swing, but the majority have had negative from not meeting those targets. So we are kind of working together to try and understand what it looks like going forward and how we can make the process more fair for local authorities.
Thanks. Just on that note, sorry, Chair, is it possible for manufacturers to make things more difficult for local authorities to recycle in terms of what they produce or anything? Because if it's in their benefit that they don't hit the targets, is that a possibility, or is there a loophole there?
Okay, Chantel or Chief Officer?
I can come in. And the whole point of the EPR legislation is to ensure that they're producing materials that are sustainable. So it's not intended to assist them, but they're the ones being penalised because they're having to pay into the fund to pay for the costs of processing that packaging. So it's intended to, in time, become more of a circular economy. That's what the intention is behind it, so that you're narrowing that loop in terms of materials, where they're produced, where they're then processed and recycled, or whether they're reused. So that's the whole sort of circular economy sort of cycle, really. That's what they're trying to achieve. I'm happy to bring a further report on EPR at some point if you want further detail. That's not a problem.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Got other speakers? Councillor Wakeham, did you want to speak? No? Okay, Councillor Park.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. There is another side, I think it was touched on by Chantel, that there are authorities who have deteriorated since that year are still getting the upper level of the money. So it's like as if you're being rewarded for poor productivity.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Banks.
Thank you, Chair. And this just ties in nicely. I hope the committee don't mind, but could I take the liberty of asking that the committee would possibly care to send in a letter of how we feel about this via Katie, obviously, to show our displeasure in what's happening, and hopefully that could go some way to helping us in reversing or lessening the position. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, I didn't have my speaker on, so that's moved. That's seconded. Any other speakers before we move further to the recommendation? No? Okay, the recommendations as per page 22 was review and comment on the place of growth and review comment on the street scene and transportation portfolio reductions in budget, and with the addition of that we will send a letter forward to Cabinet. Okay, can I have show of hands, all those in favour? That's carried. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, this is where agenda item 9 now, which is the outcome on consultation in public toilet review and local toilet strategy, is now the next item. So for those online that didn't hear before, we're moving on to agenda item 9, the outcome on the public consultation. And if I can hand over to Katie.
Thank you. Can I also introduce Ian Bushell, who's online? Should be able to see Ian Bushell. Ian's the one of the highways area managers, but he public conveniences falls within his remit. So hopefully Ian will help me with going through the report. I will apologise first that there are so many documents with this report, but I felt it was important to be transparent with all the consultation responses, so you can see the level of engagement that's taken place, and you can see the kinds of responses we've received. We are looking at ways of trying to present this in an easier fashion next time round. So whether there's a link that you can then go to the website and view the responses there, that's something that's been worked on. So just to cover the reports, this report follows the special meeting of Flintshire County Council in August last year, where we received a notice of motion regarding the proposed closure of the 3 remaining council-owned facilities in Mould, Holywell and Tulacra. I'm not going to read through the outcome of that meeting, but there were four things that we were asked to consider. One was around the budget and a public consultation in item 1. The second was around an engagement plan and trying to encourage organisations to participate in the promotion by displaying the toilet stickers, and then ensuring that no public convenience was closed or restricted before Cabinet has listened to this report. And then looking at the delivery model of public conveniences in terms of how they're operated in the future, and looking at all grants that might be accessible for us to bid for. So to cover the report, we did hold a public consultation. So that was held between the 5th of November and the 2nd of December. So the report will go through that in more detail shortly. The report will cover the local toilet strategy, and I know a few members on this committee have asked around that and feel that it's a timely opportunity to review the strategy. So the last strategy was approved in February 2024, and the guidelines in the legislation state that we should be reviewing it every 2 years from when we last published or reviewed it. So, and within 1 year of every local government election. So I'll address that later on in the report as well. So when I take you through this report, I am going to be referring to a lot of tables within the report. So I have numbered them as figure 1, figure 2 and so on. So I'll try and refer to them as I go through. And there are a number of appendices also included. So the public consultation was held, as I said, between 5th of November and 2nd of December. And it wasn't a consultation on, whether it was a good idea to close them or not. It was more around trying to generate ideas and suggestions about how we might keep them open without the county council funding in the future. So there are 2 surveys made available, one for members of the public and then a separate one for businesses and organisations and community or volunteer groups. Copies of the surveys are both in appendices 2 and 3. So we had 497 responses altogether for the public survey and 36 for the businesses. You can see the breakdown in terms of male-female ratio and so on within 1.04, and overall 20.7% of the respondents considered themselves to be disabled. Appendix 4 and Appendix 5 give some details of the responses, so they are quite lengthy. Out of all those responses, the majority were actually lived in those areas in Mold, Holywell or Tulacre, and around 27% were visitors, and then the remaining were town and community councils or Flintshire County councillors. We had the largest response in terms of the businesses from those businesses who are located in Mold, so 66.7%. And then 30% were located in Holywell and the remaining 13.9% in Tulacre. The bulk of them were from high street or independent shops or local businesses, and cafes, restaurants, pubs, and then we had town and community councils and third sector voluntary organisations respond as well. We asked how often, in terms of the public survey, we asked people how often they visited the council-run public toilets in these locations. 58% of respondents said that they rarely or never visited them, but we did have 41.28% said that they visited them on either a daily, weekly or monthly basis. So there's quite an equal split to a certain extent. And you can see that in figure 1 with the splits in terms of how often people visited. We also asked them how easy people would find it to use other community toilet facilities if they didn't exist. So the majority responded that they would find it very difficult, but we did get a high proportion that said they'd find it easy or very easy to use the facilities in either the libraries or supermarkets, and you can see that within figure 2 on page 76 of the report. There were quite a number of barriers quoted why people couldn't use those community toilet facilities, and that included lack of signage, restricted opening times, distance from the town centres, accessibility was cited as an issue, security and antisocial behaviour. And the antisocial behaviour extended to things like vandalism and cleanliness. A lot of people also quoted the stigma and fear of being challenged from using local business facilities without buying from them as well as a bit of an issue. We also then asked people whether they'd ever used other toilets in the community when they hadn't bought any goods or services at the premises and how often they'd done that. And overwhelmingly, nearly 85% responded that it never or rarely used other facilities. The people who said that they sometimes often used them, it was generally public houses or supermarkets that were used, and also the libraries. In Mold, a large proportion of respondents also said they used the Daniel Owen Centre, which obviously are not operated by the county council. So I move on to 1.09. People were asked to consider whether, if those facilities stayed open under a different operating model, how supportive they'd be of paying for their use. The majority of people, 77.6%, responded that they'd be supportive or very supportive of paying a small charge, which again would help go towards covering the costs. We also asked people to consider other options for keeping them open, and we had a number of suggestions given to us. The main one was around giving them to the town or community councils to operate them. There's a lot of suggestions around businesses sponsoring them, or getting some organisations or voluntary groups to come together and take on the running and the maintenance costs. Some suggestions in some areas, such as Tulacre, around seasonal opening, for example, between March and October, and also reduced opening times, so shorter opening times. For example, somebody suggested 10 a.m. till 2 p.m. I think the majority of responses, though, were around giving them to the town and community councils to operate them. We did also have some derogatory comments. So people felt that it should be a county council responsibility and that we should continue to provide them as well. So we have included that within the report. Other suggestions were things like honesty boxes, self-cleaning, automatic toilet booths or pods, or using other facilities such as town council offices or citizens' advice and connects. Then we move on to the business survey. So we asked the businesses to let us know, if why they don't offer toilet facilities and, what were their barriers. Some of the things they quoted were insufficient facilities or just not appropriate for that particular business type. Other barriers included having insufficient staff to monitor them whilst they're open, and also concerns around additional maintenance and repair costs for those businesses as well. If I move on to 1.14, we asked them what would encourage them to consider opening up the facilities to visitors in the future, and so unsurprisingly, we didn't get any yeses for that, so nobody was really open to doing that, sadly. I've mentioned some of the barriers already. Generally, the businesses felt that operating them through town and community councils or other voluntary third sector groups was the best option, and then applying for grant funding to try and upgrade them or improve the facilities as well was the suggestion that came back. So in summary, we had a wide range of views. You can see from some of the appendices, some of the comments that we've had, not all of them pleasant, unfortunately. But the most favoured option in terms of the responses received was for the town and community councils to take on the operation and running of the facilities. And generally, most people were favourable of paying a small charge to help cover some of the running costs as well as some of the suggestions around applying for external grant funding to improve the existing facilities. I have covered the grant funding within 1.16. We have, over the last 12 months, Ian and I we've been working with Niall and his team to look at funding options, and we have actually submitted bids both through Flintshire's capital programme, and we tried through the shared prosperity funding, but unfortunately we were either unsuccessful with the bid at the time, or the running and operation of the toilets through that particular grant didn't meet the criteria of the grant, so we weren't able to do that. We are, you'll hear from Niall shortly on Pride in Place funding, but we are currently exploring a potential bid through that capital grant, again to look at refurbishing and upgrading the 3 toilet facilities, and we'd seek to do that before looking to transfer them. In the intervening time, we have had 3 expressions of interest for community asset transfer from the respective town and community councils in Mold, Holywell and Tulacra. So subject to approval through this process today and through Cabinet, we would be looking to progress that. And we will obviously continue to look at other alternatives as well, and look at providing access to toilet facilities and other community buildings as well, as and when we can. So I cover the local toilet strategy, and you'll know from previous reports that there's no legal requirement for local authorities to actually provide or maintain public toilets directly, or for us to actually provide additional toilet facilities, but we do have to produce a local toilet strategy and assess the needs of the community in relation to toilet provision. And then we have to take a strategic and transparent approach to best meet that need. So in terms of the timetable, I think members of this committee have asked previously about reviewing it. The legislation does allow us the flexibility to review the strategy at any time, and following which we have to publish a statement of the steps that we've taken in accordance with that strategy. So I've tried to include within Appendix 6 what the old strategy looked like. We first published that in March 2024, following a 12-week consultation at that time, 2023. And then I've included the proposed timetable within Appendix 7, We still have to follow the statutory timetable, even if we decide for operational reasons to voluntarily publish a review or update the strategy. So we still have to do that. So we're trying to work that out. If we published our first toilet strategy in March 2024, then we need to take a review of our current strategy covering the period March 2024 to March 2026, and then we have to publish an interim progress statement by September this year. So that's what we're proposing to do. I've tried to give you a bit of a map of how that looks. We also would have to then review the local toilet strategy again within a year of the ordinary election. So the next election's obviously in May. So that means we would have to do it within 12 months. So by May 2027. So I've proposed the draft timetable for reviewing the strategy within the report as well. Hopefully that covers everything. So I'm open to questions. And obviously Ian's online as well on hand to answer any operational questions.
Okay, thank you very thank you very much for that. Councillor Bithell.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report and the consultation results on the future public conveniences. It tells us really nothing that we didn't already know, with due respect. We all know that people, because we are people, we all know that sometime or other we need a public convenience, and we all use them, whether we're old, elderly, young, parents with babies or whatever, disabled people, people who have particular infirmities which require access to public conveniences on a regular basis, on a timely basis. We all knew that beforehand, and again, I think that was said in the discussions that we've had on this in previous occasions. I think it's important that we actually recognise that we aim as an authority to regenerate our towns and ensure their viability and sustainability. They're struggling at the moment, not just here but elsewhere in the country. It's a council plan. It's in the council plan. They're in quite stark letters, really, that this is our intention, our aim. But what do we do? What our actions? Do our actions meet that particular aim and objective? I'm afraid it doesn't. We say one thing and do something quite opposite, which really harms those particular towns and communities. Now, the point is, we are trying to pass the parcel in this, and this is what the consultation is all about. We don't want to do it anymore. We can't do it anymore. We can't afford it. Will you do it? No. Will you do it? No. Will you do it? No. And this is, rather lamentable, really, in real terms. The only people who really, at the end of the day, have said that they will step up to the plate to save us from the impact that this will have are the town and community councils. Thank goodness that they're there and that they are showing some willingness to pick up the particular tab on this. But there's another issue here, really. It's not just those towns and the resort of Talacra that's required. It's not just the people living in that particular area. It's a much wider area that and public which will be needing those particular facilities. The visitors to Talacra, the visitors and the customers coming to Mole. Mole's got a population of 10,500, but we well know from previous studies that it serves a population of something like 55,000 people. There are 16 towns and villages around Mold, Gwenamonydd, Gwenaffield, Pantamowen, Kilkin, Leeswood, Tryden, and so on, that look to Mold for the services. And it comes out quite strongly in the consultation report. If you look at it, it's worth reading. And I've read it from cover to cover. That particular service is required by those people visiting the town on a regular basis to do their shopping and to get services which they need. And in that sense, really, it'll be the town council taxpayers who will be paying for this facility, but a much wider public that will be benefiting from this. So in that sense, really, I think it's unfair and it's unreal to actually expect town and community councils to actually accept that particular expense, rather than being spread out more widely. I've said it many times before, and it comes out again in the consultation. I'd be quite prepared to pay for using the public convenience, and other people have said it as well. Rather than having somewhere which is untidy, smelly, disgusting, I'd rather pay 25p or whatever to use a decent, clean, pleasantly smelling public convenience if I had to. And I think people have amplified that there. And again, it comes out in the report very strongly, doesn't it? That people are comparing us with other areas. Llangollen is mentioned in the consultation report. where you pay 40 or 50p, I think it says, to use the toilet, and they're nice. You know, people are welcome to use them, and they're pleased to use them. We've never tried that. We talked about it, we've discussed it, but really it was too much bother to even run a pilot on that. We could have raised some money. We wouldn't have perhaps covered the entire expense, but we would have helped to defray some of that expense. We haven't done that. And that's very sad, really, because, again, it was far easier just to pass it off and say, we're not doing this anymore. And I think that's rather lamentable, really, and reflects on us as an authority. The mention here is in the report again, you know, businesses don't want them. And quite understandably, we said in the debate, you know, would you or I go into a shop? I wouldn't, you know, and say, can I use your toilet? And I'm not a customer. People won't do that. And, you know, they got some decency, really, and they'd be embarrassed to do that. You know, and again, the report, the consultation states quite specifically, they'd have to go in and buy something, a cup of coffee or whatever, to actually use the toilet facility. They feel obliged to do that, and that comes at a cost. And again, for elderly people and so on who haven't got the money, that's a cost too far, really. You know, so again, that's not a viable proposition. The Daniel Owen Community Centre toilets are mentioned here. They're not run by the town council, they're run by the community centre. And again, they do allow the public to use them, and the town council pays £5,000 a year to help them in that particular respect. But the Daniel Owen Centre also have a notice of please make a voluntary contribution towards using these, and surprisingly, or perhaps not surprisingly, people are prepared to throw money in a bucket for that particular purpose. And it's local authorities do this. I was in Portmaddock a year or so ago, and on the public conveniences there's a similar request. Make a donation towards the upkeep of these particular toilets. Now, as I've said, the only people who are prepared, it would seem, to take up this role of responsibility, us having abrogated our responsibility, will be the town and community councils. Now, Mole Town Council, again, has been asking since last November for a meeting with county officers to just discuss this, really, to know exactly what we're taking on, for example, how much it will cost and so on, and what the running costs are, to get some sort of impression. And we hoped, if we were going to take it on, to be able to put something in the budget. That's gone now, and there's been no response. Those consultations have not taken place, which again, I think is a pretty damning report, really, on us as an authority. So I'm really asking that that particular consultation takes place forthwith, immediately, so that those town and community councils can make the preparations needed to take over the running of the public conveniences in these areas if they decide to go ahead with that once they've got the full facts and figures from us, which they've been waiting for some time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Pearce?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was looking at the report, and there's been an extensive consultation, and I think I have to applaud the officers for actually going through all that and compiling the results. It's very comprehensive. Interest in the community asset transfer, and what Councillor Bithell says, that councils seem to be willing to do it, but there's been no discussions yet. So hopefully that will take place. Now, if these three toilets get moved across to the respective local councils, would there be a possibility that the budget that the council holds for this will still be there? And if so, would it make sense to passport some of that remaining funding that the council will hold as an incentive to these other councils to take them? Because if you're going to passport these toilets across and there's a budget remaining, well, I think it's fair that we shouldn't keep that. We should passport that across. Also, during the consultation, I'm wondering whether we benchmarked other local authorities. We'll see later on in the car parking where we do benchmark other local authorities as a comparison. And we're just wondering whether that was done with local authorities. you may be aware in Buckley that Buckley Town Council actually run the toilets in the town near the library. We do have a budget for that. It is set as part of the precept, but what really impacts the budget is vandalism of those toilets. You know, we try and mitigate for that because we know it does happen, and we've had some serious costs in relation to that. But I think that, you know, that shouldn't dissuade people or town councils from taking them on, because without that, it looks as though that they may not have any. But during all this, you know, we've talked about mould and Holywell, and I've just mentioned Buckley. What's the situation in Flint? Flint don't appear to be in here. Do they have public toilets in Flint, or do they use the local businesses? I'm just interested in what happens there as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone, Katie, do you want to respond to them?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Pearce. So in terms of passporting the remaining budget, I have included within 1.22 and in section 2 an outline of the budget. So 78, we started with in 2024 with a budget of 78,000, but we had actually had an overspend. So we actually, by the end of period 12, in 24-25, we actually had an overspend, and for exactly those same reasons, because of vandalism and damage. And the overspend was about 34k. Obviously, in budget setting for last year, that 59,000 was actually taken out of the budget, and obviously we were only left with a balance of 19k to run all the remaining toilet facilities this year, and we took the decision to keep them open. So we're currently, this year, we're actually projecting an overspend of 95,000. It has come down slightly, so it's around 87,000, and for that reason we're putting aside, I think, 53k, which was in the budget report earlier on, as a pressure in for 6 months to allow us the time to be able to transfer those assets. So it would only be a remaining budget of 19,000 for all 3 facilities, which is not a huge amount, unfortunately. We haven't done any benchmarking with other local authorities, but that's certainly something I can include in the report. You know, I'm happy to go away and look at that. That's not a problem. The only other one was Flint. I'd have to go and check the local toilet strategy to see what's listed, but it's in the appendices, but I haven't managed to find it just yet.
They don't have it. About the same time as Buckley, I think they went.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Parkhurst.
Diolch, Chair. And thank you, Katie, and your team for your report and the consultation, and for keeping the toilets open to date in those 3 locations, despite the fears that were expressed last summer. I've got a couple of things I want to take up. Firstly, regarding the toilets in locations other than Mould, Tulacqua and Holywell. There are toilet facilities, for example, we've heard in the J. Jones Leisure Centre and in the Mould Library, just 2 examples. But unless I'm mistaken, and I might be, and please correct me if I am, I don't think there is signage to indicate that those public toilets are available. Now, that's been raised for at least 2 years and would be a very easy win in terms of putting up some signs so people know where the toilets are. So if I am not mistaken and there isn't signage, I really do request that some signs go up as soon as possible. It just seems so simple to help people, you know where the toilets are. Another point I want to raise is about the potential asset transfers. The wording on page 74, recommendation 3, which says well, it says prior to their transfer to the town and community councils. This really assumes this is a done deal. And I note Councillor Biffle's comments that this is not a done deal because at least one town council is awaiting a meeting and has already set its budget, and the potential for capital funding for upgrading the toilets, which we're going to hear about in a further item, is very much welcome. But there's a whole question of revenue funding, and I'm sure Councillor Biffle would appreciate that, being on Mold Town Council himself. So I do feel that we're probably slightly premature with this, and it may be that the wording of recommendation 3 should say their potential transfer, if members are happy with that. But I would echo Councillor Biffle's request that the consultation with the town councils and community councils goes ahead urgently, because at the moment I gain the impression that there is a sort of gap in this, that consultation hasn't really taken place, but some people, probably innocently, are assuming it's all going to go ahead when in fact there are conversations to be had. Another point I want to raise is that in connection with the consultation, there was no real question about visitors' preference for visiting locations where there are toilets. In other words, people need a safety net. And Councillor Biffle mentioned that visitors compare other areas. And I think that's very true, that people often want to know that there is a toilet at hand. And I don't think that was picked out in the consultation, but I think we need to be aware of it, because a town like Mold, for example, is one of the rare examples of a thriving market town where people come to the town for a whole variety of very good reasons, including the fact that there are public toilets. And we don't want to do anything which would reduce the footfall in Mold, and indeed in Holywell and Tulacqua as well. So I think we need to sort of recognise that people do have a choice where to go, and toilets could be the crucial factor in deciding whether a person goes to Mold, Holywell, Tulacqua, or somewhere else. So I think that needs to be recognised, and I think that is about it for my questions. So yeah, I just like to propose then on recommendation 3. There are actually 2 recommendations 3 on this list, I see. So I'm referring to the first recommendation 3, that we include the word potential transfer. Jochen, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Ian, I see your hand up online. Do you want to come in on this point?
I just wanted to respond to Councillor Biffle. He raised a couple of issues about correspondence or consultation. There was a number of questions came forward from Mold Town Council to Street Scene about costs for cleansing, consumables, maintenance, vandalism and stuff like that. We provided the information back into. There was other questions that came forward for outside the Street Scene department. We're about the building, about the shop that's located there. So more than happy to come and sit with Mold Town Council, with possibly someone from V&E as well, to further discussions.
Okay, thank you for that, Ian. Katie, do you have anything to add before we move on to the next speaker?
Sorry, yeah, I mean, the point about signage, we'll certainly take that away, Councillor Parkhurst, and yeah, I'm happy with the wording, and obviously I'll change the numbering as well in the recommendations, that's no problem. Thank you. Okay,
thank you. Councillor Healy, next.
Thank you, sir. I'm in agreement with a number of things that some of the speakers have said, but I'd particularly like to offer my congratulations, support to those town and community councils who had expressed an interest in taking on the toilets, because I think really salvation depends on them. And I would actually say that it is very much in the interest of those areas to do that. I'm actually very sorry that the toilets have been a low priority as far as our own council is concerned, because I do see them as an important economic asset because of the points that have been made all along in facilitating footfall in an area, which facilitates economic regeneration. And I'm really sorry that toilets haven't been prioritised in some of our placemaking plans and some kind of provision into, if there is revenue funding to keep them going, some kind of financial provision hadn't been made by ourselves. I do see them being as important. Councillor Bithell commented on the number of people who descend upon Mold itself, and it is a market town, and how busy and successful that is. Now, they don't all themselves have toilet facilities, and I agree that people feel uncomfortable about going into a cafe or whatever, or Wetherspoons or what have you, simply to use the toilet. I'm not opposed to charging. It's happening clearly in Denbighshire, and I think if that helps, then so be it. But there's obviously the administrative side to it. But I do feel that from an economic point of view, that we should have prioritised toilets ourselves more fully. It is clearly an essential asset into Lacra as far as public health is concerned, quite apart from the economic and tourism arguments, because simply you do not want people using the dunes and the shoreline as a toilet facility. That is completely wrong, and the toilets there must be kept open. So, very good wishes to the relevant community council there. And I do think from an economic point of view for Holywell and Mold, it is, Holywell and Mold, it is in their best interest. Incidentally, in Flint, there is a very good accessible toilet at the railway station, in addition to J. Jones. And I do agree with Councillor Parkhurst over signage. It would help. And signage to a toilet to the railway station might be an idea as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Healy. Can I bring in before Councillor Perfect?
There we are. Managed to get the mic on. The toilets in Flint have been closed for years. I'm sure most of you recognise that. In fact, they've been turned into flats. The places that you can use the toilet are the library, J. Jones Pavilion. We've got various cafes, and as was pointed out by David Healy, we've also got new ones now at the train station. Most people who visit Flint know all this, and I have to agree that we do need some signage for them, but we do provide quite a lot of places that you can use the toilets. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Perfect. Councillor Wakelam.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a question to Katie. The cost, cost overspend of £95,000 and the 19,000 we had. What in a perfect world, what is the cost of running the 3 toilets for a year without any vandalism, without any, is it how does the budget break down? And I just want to see when we're pulled up on this, the cost that everybody in Flint is paying for the people that are damaging the toilets as well. This is something I want to know. Thank you.
Okay, Katie, are you able to?
I may need to ask Ian to come in, but generally you can see the budget we had was 78,000. and the overspend is generally because of repairs and damage through vandalism. So 34k was down to pure vandalism and damage generally, so it's quite significant. Ian might, obviously it's different for each of the 3 toilets because we get more vandalism and damage in certain areas than others, and it generally tends to be in those standalone facilities, whereas if they're part of another building we see less damage. I don't know if Ian, you wanted to come in with any further detail around that?
I can get the exact breakdown, Councillor Wakeland, that's not a problem. I can provide that. I don't know off the top of my head. But with it's opening, closing 7 days a week. It's the cleansing, it's the consumables, you know, the electric power, all that sort of stuff that builds up the annual running costs. With mold has the least repairs because it was revamped around 5 years ago and needs a bit more of a refresh if we're successful in Pride in Place funding. Hollywell is the older of the facilities, so there's a lot more repairs that are required to keep that facility open. And same with Talacra, really. It was a standalone mobile unit that was removed from another area in Flintshire and relocated there. So that's, you know, in need of refurbishment. But it does come down to repairs and just general maintenance is a lot of the overspend.
Okay, don't think we quite got an answer to you.
Yeah, thank you. It was more, so I was wondering if you had a contingent of the 78,000, if you had a contingency in there for vandalism and damage during its use and its life of a year, and then the 34,000 was on top of that. But I was trying to work out whether it's obviously a third of the budget is purely because people from the county and visiting the county come in and decide that whilst they're going to use the toilet, they're also going to break it at the same time, as you know.
No, I accept your comment. If it is going to be a community asset transfer, I'm sure each community council wants to know how much they need to budget for.
I think that's been part of the problem though over the years, is the budget's never been sufficient. So any additional costs in terms of repairs and maintenance have been overspent. There's no contingency. We've had to declare them as pressures as a result, and obviously now we've reduced. That budget's been removed, so we've only got 19,000 for all 3 facilities. So it's an even larger cost pressure, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Jones and Councillor Dolphin.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just wanted to confirm, because Buckley has provided its own toilets, and there's 2 things here: whether whose responsibility should it be, and then also the cost pressures that come about due to damage. I personally believe it is the responsibility of the town to provide their own toilet facility. Generally, because Buckley has done it, and I know Flint is doing it in a different way, but we actually provide the toilets. Of course, when it comes to just like the county council, when it comes to considering whether that's the right thing to do and how much damage there is, and we have the same issues, and Councillor Pearce will know, and Councillor Rose, who's online. We have a budget for that, but we also understand that there's an extra pressure when damage comes up. We've even considered closing the toilets in Buckley one time because of the amount of damage. So this is something which will need to be considered by the town and community councils. But overwhelmingly, the people of the town actually want to keep it open. So, yeah, it's just one of those sad things that, realistically, people want the toilets open and we know that it does benefit the town. But then you've got this other side to it, where some people, very few people, cause a lot of damage, which is sometimes, up to 30% of the budget we provide in the year. So it's I suppose there's 2 parts to it, really. I think it should be a community asset that's led by the towns, but I also think they've got to be mindful of what is coming there as cost pressures, which we deal with on a local level. It's just to give that kind of local perspective. Thanks, Dave.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Dolphin?
I'll just pick up on that. This is a real opportunity for our local towns to run their own local facilities at last. And maybe that's how it always should have been. And this item will lead into another agenda item, Pride in Place Impact Fund, later on, where there'll be some more detail about how that might happen. So this, to me, is quite a straightforward report. And so are the recommendations with the slight amendment that's been put forward. It's good that we've had this strategy and exercise in consultation done and completed. And now we can move on with, hopefully, the forthcoming transfers. There may be a payment model. Nothing like that's ever been discussed before in the future, but that may be a possibility. Some people may know I went to Corwin just a couple of weeks ago. 40p, 8 shillings to use the toilets in Corwin. Well, and of course it is worth every penny if you need the toilets. So that's 8 shillings. So it can be a shock to a lot of people. And going back to the survey, yeah, about a quarter, just under a quarter of the survey of the consultees would not support a pay model. But something perhaps that should be considered in the future. But then if you supply a pay model, let's have it right. Let's have some good toilets. Don't pay for something that isn't up to the right spec. So it's all comparative. So this is a real opportunity to me for our local towns. Holywell, I'm sure will go forwards with it. I hope they do. Mould, come on, grasp the nettle, get in there. You are a major town. You're a flag bearer for Flintshire. So we would hope Mould will do it. And Carys, they're not in this, of course, because Flint's been mentioned. Let's give a flag wave for Carys, because they've got some fantastic toilets. If you're ever walking through Carys or driving through, stop and have a look. Absolutely amazing. Use them if you need. They just ask for a donation. Absolutely amazing. Well done, Carys.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Dalton. Okay, we'll move on to the recommendations on page 74.
I just make reference, if I may, to the toilet strategy. You know, I've said before, and I'll say it again, that is the most useless piece of legislation I've ever come across in my life. It acknowledges the urgent need and the basic need for toilets, public conveniences in the country, and then goes on then to say nothing as to who, which body is responsible for running them. What a useless piece of paper. The only good it would make is toilet paper at the end of the day, quite frankly.
Okay, thank you for that contribution. Councillor Hutchinson.
Sorry for my lateness this morning, Mr. Chairman. As you can see, I've got a... But anyway, Buckley, it's been mentioned before, and it's been dealt with many times. Buckley is the most generous town for providing toilet facilities, has done for many, many years. And you can go to Buckley, you can go to the office and collect the keys to go upstairs into the library where there are toilets. And that's been a long, long standing permission that's been granted. And I see nothing wrong with it. And I'd like to pay tribute to that facility because there's never any vandalism. School children come there during their lunchtime to use the library, but also to use the toilet as well. And it's well run. It's magnificent in the management of it. And I don't take any credit for that personally, but I just want that on record, Mr. Chairman, that there is a very, very good facility at the toilets in Buckley, and please don't interfere with them.
Oh. Thank you, Councillor Hutchinson, and others for speaking highly of Buckley. And considering the report was about Mould, Holywell and Talacra. So we'll move on to the recommendation on page 74 with the slight amendment to pay recommendation 3 to say potential transfer to the town and community councils. We have a mover. And Councillor second, yeah, Councillor Barker seconded. Can I have a show of hands, those in favour? Okay, that's fully carried. Thank you very much for that. Okay, moving on to, on your papers, it will be agenda item 11, which is the review of the car parking charges, which has been brought forward. So if I can hand over to Chief.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Can I introduce, I've got a couple of colleagues online, if I can see them correctly. I've got Vicky Plant, who's the car parking service manager and the enforcement team. And we've got Kevin Crumplin, who's the supervisor for the enforcement team, also online. And possibly Chantal, if she's managed to rejoin. I know she had to go to another meeting, but Chantal may still be there as well. So we've got officers there on hand for questions afterwards. So I'll briefly take you through the report. This is linked to the previous report on the council fund budget. So we've given you a range of different options within the report. We obviously brought the previous, I think previously looked at tariffs changing in May 2025. So this time we have included some further options around permits and comparison as well with other North Wales local authority areas for different options for the charges as well. So if I briefly take you through the report, we have done some comparison in 1.03 with other local authorities. You can see in the table is the table on page 206, where we've obviously compared ourselves to what those tariffs are across North Wales. In particular, we're not looking at changing the tariffs in town centres or other car parks, but we have looked in particular around long stay charges at locations such as the railway stations or ports, some of the popular tourist destinations or visitor attractions. And, the first thing we noticed is that, those local authorities levy much higher tariffs than we do in Flintshire. There's a table at the bottom of page 206 which gives you some examples of those across North Wales. I'm not going to go into them in detail. So I think for that reason, we feel, we're offering very, very low tariffs. I think Flint stations is £2.50 for a 24-hour period. Theatre Clwyd, you can see a range of tariffs from £1 for 2.5 hours or £2 for up to 14 hours, which is very, very low in comparison. And then we've got Talacra at £2 for up to 4 hours and £4 for up to 11 hours. We've also been looking at the permit charges in terms of what we provide. We have a range of permits and we have both residential, business and seasonal annual permits as well. So we detail those in 1.02, and then we've done a comparison in 1.05 of what those similar permit charges are across North Wales. So you can see a comparison there. Again, Flintshire's charges for some of those permits are much lower than the charges applied across North Wales. So following that, we've undertaken a bit of a review of our own charges, and we've, in preparation for the budget setting process, we've put some options together to look at increases at certain locations, and we've proposed those in 1.06. There's a small table there, and using the payment data and the ticket sales for this year, we've given some indicative figures of what the anticipated increase in income could be. You can see that in the end column there. As I said, we're not proposing any charges, any changes to charges in town centre car parks or other car parks, because we only recently increased those from May 2025, so we've not even achieved a full year yet. And I've obviously given some figures there around what the income targets are for this year and what our expected outturn will be as at month 9 budget monitoring. Obviously, the income from car parking helps offset the costs of providing and maintaining the car parks across the county, and that's detailed a bit further in section 2 of the report. We then go on to present some options for permit charges. Some of the permit charges haven't been increased since pre-pandemic. Some did increase last year, such as the annual permit charge, which it was in line with the tariff increase. And there's a range there. I think I was asked the question as to why didn't you choose 10, 20, 30% earlier on? And we've tried to do it. Obviously, we're trying to make meet a budget gap. So that's why we gave such a high range. But we also did a comparison with the other local authorities across North Wales, and if we were to try and bring those permit charges up to the same levels, some of them would have to increase by nearly 50%. That said, we haven't recommended that. We have proposed an uplift of 10% across all the permit types from 1st of April. And I think we've given some figures within the report of what that equates to per day for some of those increases, which isn't significant. 11 pence per day for the resident permits and up to 15 pence per day over a full year effect. The annual permits would be slightly different. It's a bit more of an increase at 26 pence per day and 36 pence per day. And then we've, at the bottom on page 209, we've given an indication of what those increase in permit charges would bring in terms of additional income. And what we've tried to do is we've tried to estimate, well, if we saw a reduction in the uptake as a result of the increase, what would that look like? And we've been quite conservative by estimating a 25% reduction would bring in an additional income of 23,000. So overall, both the increase in the permit charges and the increase in proposed parking tariffs would bring in a potential increased income of 73,000. So that's what was included within the proposals for the budget for next year. Obviously, it was 75,000, but we've been quite conservative in the figures that we've provided within this report. I think that's it. So open to any questions.
Okay, thank you. Can I just ask a quick question on the Theatre Clwyd one? I didn't notice it earlier until just reading it now. 8 AM to 10 PM, £1 for 2.5 hours, and then £4 for 14 hours. 2.5 hours isn't enough for a play in the evening, and therefore you could pay your £1 and gamble that nobody's going to come and ticket you at 9 o'clock or 9:30 before 10 o'clock, or pay £4. Can we include in there, as in Talacra, £2.50 for 4 hours? So you have the £1 for 2.5, £2.50 for 4 hours, and £4, and then people can turn up at 6 o'clock in the safe knowledge that they've paid till the 10 o'clock period, rather than either have to rush out to put a £1 in or pay extra £4. Or is there a reason why that's there?
I may need to bring Kevin and Vicky in, but we've modelled obviously the price increases are modelled on the same operating hours as we currently have. It would be very difficult for me to give you some indicative figures of take up. So I would assume, though, the 37,000 additional income there is based on current utilisation levels. If you have a lower charge for a lesser time, that would probably reduce that additional income by a significant amount, but we wouldn't know what the utilisation figures are. We wouldn't be able to do a comparison with what we do currently and what we would do in the future. I mean, we can do whatever you want us to do, but I think that we've only modelled those figures based on current utilisation levels and current operating hours. If that answers the question, it's very difficult to do a comparison of both otherwise.
Okay, I just think that for 2.5 hours, it's not conducive to a theatre goer in the evening, is it? Can we bring in Kevin or Vicky to respond?
Hi. Yeah, I would tend to agree with what Katie was saying. We've got nothing there that we can really model it on at the moment, but we could certainly look at including that within the TRO when it updates.
When would that be?
So as part of, obviously, subject to approval, we would then have to go through a process of advertising, re-advertising the revised charges. So this would go through, we'd have to amend the traffic regulation order, which I've obviously detailed within the report. But we've included these proposed tariffs as options. If you want additional options, we would have to then go away and remodel that. but it's difficult to do a comparison with current utilisation levels and current operating hours because they wouldn't be the same. So I can't model what the take-up would be. It would be very difficult for us to forecast the income. We've tried to do that in a pragmatic way, to show, we estimate based on the current utilisation levels and current operating hours, this is the additional income we could get. But we can certainly try and do it, but it would be a finger in the air, unfortunately.
Okay, I'll bring in other speakers and we'll see how we go. Councillor Pearce.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Firstly, I'm 100% with you on the Theatre Clwyd. I had written down here the time span review to suit the length of the show. So I think you were on the right track there. And looking at a model versus common sense, I think the common sense view is that £2.50 for 4 hours is reasonable, where you slot it in between the £1 for 2.5 hours and £4 up to 14 hours. I think that we should go with that, irrespective of what the model says. I think that is the common sense approach, and if that is a proposal, Chair, if we need a proposal for that, I will put that forward for the Scrutiny Committee to have a look at. But I also want to say that I'm very pleased that on page 208 there is in section 106, 106, that no charges are proposed for town centre car parks or other car parks for 26, 27. When I looked at the car parking charges before I saw that, I probably would have not been in favour of this report or gone with the recommendations. But the fact is that no charges are proposed is a good thing. We need to get the football going. We need to keep the football in our towns, and I would hope that would apply also to the following year as well, to have sort of at least a 3-year moratorium on town centre car parking charges. It's bad enough for the businesses in the towns at the moment, but I think that I am pleased to see that. On section 105, and this is where I think the report just lacks some detail. Other local authority permit charges. Permit for what? Is this advanced payments, like a car parking season ticket? Is it for resident parking in the streets? It doesn't actually explain what that is. And also in 107, it talks about resident permits. But what is that? Is it for parking in your street? Does certain developments have resident-only parking run by the council? There's no detail here about what that is for. The recommendation is an uplift in all permit types, but there's very little in the report about the different types of permits and what they're actually for. So it's difficult to sort of agree with the recommendation if a lot of the information is not missing. I'm sure the Chief Officer will verbally update us, and I'm sure it'll all become clear. But I think that when we have a report, we do need to have some detail to support the comments. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, if I can point Councillor Pearce to section 1.02 on page 205, we detail the types of permits we currently offer. So you can see we have seasonal permits, resident permits and annual permits. So we've tried to explain what those permits provide currently within there. And obviously we've obviously got details there of the number of permits actually in circulation currently as well, which you can work back through for the figures. It's difficult to compare our types of permits with all of the local authorities because they don't call them the same thing. Some local authorities like Gwynedd, they've got a residence parking permit. Others, they've just got them by the type of vehicle. Other I think Conway have it by the type of car park. So they've got different tariffs for different types of car park. So it's difficult. You're not comparing apples and pears, unfortunately. So we've had to give a range of all their types of permits and then the types of permits we currently provide as an example. But it is difficult to compare on a like-for-like basis, unfortunately.
Yeah, if I can just come back, the reason I mentioned that resident permits, yes, fine, okay, accept that. Resident permits, off-street resident car park permits, but where are they? More than 5 years ago, I put forward a request for a particular street in the ward where there's a row of terraced houses. That's the only parking they had, and other vehicles from other parts of the town were parking there. And we asked for a residence parking scheme, and I was told we don't do those. So it's quite surprising to see what's presented here, that there are resident permits. It would be useful to know which towns have allowed resident parking on the streets, and where are the other potential areas, because this is sort of news to me, having been told previously that we don't have resident parking schemes. It wouldn't apply in your particular case, but obviously we do. So I'm interested, is it sort of available online where all the streets that do allow resident parking is available, and which car parks, again, which car parks do allow seasonal permits? I'm not aware of any in Buckley, being parochial, where a resident can park there. Perhaps they don't need it in perhaps in other areas where the parking is more limited. But I think for clarity, I think it'd be useful, obviously not today, but at a later date, or if it could be post this meeting, the streets in a particular ward that have been allowed for resident parking schemes, because it's disappointing to understand that when we ask for it, we don't do that, and then clearly it happens. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Pearce. So the resident park permits are different to what you're referring to. You're talking about a residential parking scheme, which is where we have a whole parking scheme and make it residents only. So that whole road, only residents living in that street can park in that street. That's different to this scheme. This scheme is a permit scheme, which means they haven't got any parking, so we allow them to buy a permit to park in our off-street car parks. So it's a separate scheme. If you wish to look at a particular area within your ward for a residential parking scheme, then we're quite happy to work with you. But you need to be mindful. I mean, I know Anthony's on the call for a later item. To have a resident parking scheme, you have to have all of those residents in agreement. If they're not all in agreement, then it's unlikely that that scheme would be successful or implemented. Again, it's subject to a traffic regulation order as well, so we'd have to take people through a consultation process to do that. But the permit scheme is different. It's for people who haven't got parking on street or a driveway, but they can buy a permit from us to park in a car park.
So are you saying then that if we have a row of, say, 10 or 12 terraced houses and there's no driveways, they could, or the council could look at a scheme to park on the street outside their houses, because there is no other place to park, and if there's no car park close by, that is the only option. But I think looking at this, Chair, it would be useful at a later date to have a paper on what permits available and what the criteria is. We're not going to solve it today, but it's just something that's obviously been flagged up through this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Chris Whittle.
Thank you, Chair. Can I thank the officers for this particular report, which is very well thought out and considered, and acknowledges the crucial part that car parking plays in town centre issues and in terms of supporting the viability and sustainability of those centres. It is recognised in this report. It was not recognised in the previous report on toilets, unfortunately. So thank goodness whoever produced this report has a handle on this and understands the impact that charges for car parking, if they shoot up and so on, and are not comparative, will deter people from using the town centres. That's readily acknowledged. And thank you again for proposing not to put up the charges for those town centre car parks at this particular moment in time, recognising, of course, the issues regarding sustainability and viability, and also the cost of living crisis in the present circumstances as well. So thank you for that. That will be, I think, recognised and appreciated by businesses within the town centre. And again, you know, the comparisons are there for us in terms of other towns in North Wales. You know, we're pretty good really in terms of our charges, and you know, people will be attracted if they're making those choices of where to do their shopping. So thank you for that and that recognition. In terms of the Theatre Clwyd, I'm glad you brought that up, Chair. It didn't have to fall to me as a Mole resident. You know, basically, I think it's a bit silly, really, to go from £1 for 2.5 hours to £4 for 14 hours. I enjoy the theatre, as I know several people here do, but spending 14 hours there, I think, is outrageous. They're not doing bed and breakfast there, to my knowledge, yet. But you may want to go to the theatre and also go to the restaurant there, the new Bryn Williams restaurant. 4 hours, yeah, that probably will take us through. So we need a medium there, really. £1 for 2.5 hours, £2.50 for up to 4 hours. And I think we forget the £4 for 14 hours, because nobody's going to be there that long, with all due respect. In terms of the resident parking, I think my particular ward was the first one to receive residents-only parking, and it was part of the upgrading of the safety measures outside Ysgol Bryn Coch. You know, people were parking in Alexander Road, and people there didn't have garages and so on, or draw-ins, and again, it was implemented as part of that scheme. I think the residents pay £24 a year for the permits, and it has sorted a particular problem out in that location. So there are means of doing this, really, but as Katie has said, you do need the full support of all those people in that particular street and their preparedness to pay to charge £24, whatever it is now. So again, that's not what's covered in this particular report. As has been said, it's where people are using a car park because they live in close proximity to it and can use it, but they can't use on-street parking. So I'm very grateful for the reward and the careful consideration of viability and sustainability to town centres have been taken on board. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Biffle. Councillor Wakeham.
Thank you, Chair. The Theatre Clwyd, I think if you look further down, I think it just sort of ties in with the registry office. The prices there are the same pretty much, yeah. But obviously you don't want to visit. I mean, I visited it recently for my dad passing away, and 2.5 hours was plenty of time to visit it. Also, there's a cafe at Theatre Clwyd, and my mum goes there, visits it with her friends, and so I think those sort of tie in, because there's only a little car park in the registry office, so they overspill into the main. I think that's where it comes from. I don't think it's because if you tie the two together, if you put the times for the £2 one for the other one, it just sort of, I think that's where that comes from. Our permits for contract, you know, sort of businesses and the things that, so we've got the, where is it? 300 business permits seasonal at £340. We look at all the other ones in the other counties in Wales, and you know they vary. They're about there. I mean, if you go over the border to England, one of the cheapest ones I could find for Chester, I know it's a bigger place, but I don't think it's 6 times the place, it was £2,300. That's to park for a year as a contract parker. And the last point, with what Councillor Pearce was saying about resident-only parking, I looked at this for a part of my ward, and I was told it's something we could look at, but the costs are astronomical. Is that still the case? I mean, I was just told that there isn't the money to do these kind of things at the minute. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Wakelam. So in terms of the Theatre Clwyd, where the 14 hours has come from is, you know, if somebody wanted to go and see a theatre show in the afternoon between, you know, the sort of the tariff hours when the 2.5, I'm trying to explain it. I think Kevin Crumplin will probably do a better job than I will. But basically, we have two tariffs at the Theatre Clwyd between 8 and 10 p.m. So you can pay for £1 for 2.5 hours, or you can stay for a longer period of time. And it was to do with the 5 o'clock cut-off, because I think our previous tariffs went from 8 till 5 p.m. and then we had a second tariff from 5 p.m. till 10 p.m. So we decided to make it simpler and have it as a, well, if you parked at 8 a.m., you could park well into the evening, and you wouldn't want to have to return to your vehicle to have to put another ticket on it. So that's where the 14-hour period came from, so that people weren't having to do that and buy two tickets. You can certainly go away and look at modelling, you know, the suggested £2.50, as I said earlier on. It'll be difficult to, you know, try and forecast what the utilisation levels will be, though, in doing that, and it is likely obviously to affect the estimated additional income that we have put within the report, and obviously within the budget report earlier on as well. So your second question was around the costs for residential parking schemes. I'll have to take that away unless Anthony's available, but you know, it depends on the scale of the scheme, you know, how many because we have to consult with all of the residents living on the street. So it depends, you know, how many households are there, the extents of the traffic regulation orders. So I can't put a cost on it because it's got so many variables, but I suggest it's anything from about £2,500 upwards to potentially 10k. Anthony?
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't raise my hand then. Sorry, Katie. Computer's not working very well. But yeah, it does depend. It depends on the scale of it. You can have a very sort of minor scheme, if you like. But, you know, a residence parking scheme, and we've only got one in the whole of Flintshire, as Councillor Bithell quoted before. You know, but and that's a reasonable size one. But you could have ones that, as you say, could go up to £10,000. The order making process alone, just with the cost of advertising, could be in the region of around three and a half thousand. Then you've got your markings, your lines, you know, your signage. And then obviously there is that I think one of the biggest costs that people don't appreciate is the officer time in the first instance to get one of these schemes in place, because there's about 4 or 5 different stages, as Councillor Bithell will remember, to the process. And you've got to get an overwhelming amount of support through each of those stages for it to ever come to fruition. So they are very labour-intensive schemes. And of course, you've then got the cost to residents, you know, on an annual permit system as well. So yeah, they're not cheap when you consider all the staff time and resource that goes into them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Danrose.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for those who've already mentioned Theatre Clwyd, you know, and thanks for those that have already said about the detail in this report. It's one that's got a lot in it, which has been useful. In terms of Theatre Clwyd, I agree with what's been said sort of so far, but the one question there is, obviously we've invested a lot in Theatre Clwyd over the last couple of years with their upgrades. Have we consulted Theatre Clwyd? Because we've said we've not got the exact data of what's being used, but Theatre Clwyd themselves will know the average time span of their shows and the time scales used and things like that. That surely should have been our first step in this, is to consult them and get that information and make certain they're on board with the suggested changes. The question is, obviously, has that been done? And then the other side of it is, I'm very against the increase on the residential passes. Those with those passes are typically in smaller properties in poorer areas, more densely populated, without a drive on their house because it's a smaller home. And personally, where I live, I'm the only one with a drive. There's at least 21 properties just around my home that don't have driveways. Some of those are similar to next door, where they are emergency accommodation. And I've had several cars parked on the double yellows outside while they're sorting themselves out in there. And this is not like the other car parking charges where you can decide to use that car park or not. they don't have the ability to change that. That is the only parking space available for them. So for me, I'm against that increase in the residential passes, and we prefer we didn't go forward with that. It's not a significant amount of money, but it is a significant amount of money to the individuals who are already getting increases in other areas like their council tax that will be changing. So for me, I don't think that is a suitable thing, and the comparison that's put in there, I don't think is the same, because those other areas further down the coast developed a lot later and developed more from a tourism aspect in the Victorian days, whereas the ones in Flintshire were more industrial and built far smaller properties and things without the ability. So likes of Mold Road and Brunswick Road, the other side, those are the size of the properties, that were built before car ownership and were built on the smaller side when we were an industrial mining community sort of thing. So I think that's the significant concern I've got in terms of those elements, because I think that will impact people more without the opportunity to say, no, I don't park there, or I'll use public transport to get to the shops. The other areas, everyone else has a choice in what they do and where they go. The residential parking passes, there is no choice in where they park. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for that. Kevin, I seen your hand go up when Councillor Rose mentioned Theatre Clwyd. Did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, the previous tariff changes up there for the evening tariff, basically bringing it into a 14-hour tariff, was done through sort of consultation with the theatre. They were identifying problems with the cut-off time at 5 o'clock for the car park. I don't know if Katie could sort of confirm if there was any other consultation with the price uplifts on these, but I don't think we've spoken to the theatre in connection with the price changes.
Yeah, Kevin's correct. We've based these figures purely on current utilisation figures. So obviously we'd have to go out through statutory consultation with the revision of the TRO, so they would be consulted as part of that process.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Chair. Would we not have consulted those industries like that are connected to these car parks in advance of this, rather than doing it in the formal process after decisions have been made and it's been scrutinised? Surely, if we'd had comments from Theatre Clwyd in this report, it would have made it easier for us to make some decisions.
We don't normally consult around parking charges per se, because obviously we'd have to consult more widely. How do you, we'd be at risk of excluding one group over another. So we'd have to run a full public consultation, which would be county-wide in that instance. And obviously we don't have that at our liberty at this stage.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Marshall.
Diolch yn fawr, Cadeirydd. I've got another question about Theatre Clwyd as well. Got a scenario where my wife picks up my 9-year-old grandson, takes him to Theatre Clwyd. It's really a drop-off. He goes there for guitar lessons. So it's really a drop-off, but he's too young to be just dropped off outside. So she has to park the car, take him in, wait until he's the class starts, and then takes the car away. Later on, my daughter goes there, parks the car, goes and collects him, and then goes away. So in that scenario, both of them would have to pay £1 car park for both of them, but probably only for about 15 minutes each. Is it possible in that sort of scenario to have a small area which is a drop-off, but it's like an extended period instead of a 5 minutes grace period, that it's say 15 minutes, would allow them to just go there, take the child in, and then leave? Thank you.
Kevin, would you like to respond?
Yeah, with the alterations to the road network up there, the closure of the road in front of the theatre and the little roundabout, there is actually now a drop-off point in front of the theatre.
He's 9-year-old, so it's not a case of just dropping him off and letting him walk off.
Yeah, there's no Due to the way they've changed the road network up there is actually no timescale on that drop-off point at the moment. So that is something we have picked up with the relevant officers looking at the road network up there. But as it stands at the moment, that drop-off point, you could basically drop off in there, get out the vehicle and walk someone into the theatre.
Okay, but that's not open yet, is it?
Yeah, it is. The roundabout's there and the drop-off point is in front of the theatre.
Oh, right, good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Councillor Glimbanks.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, just make a few points. First of all, I think the way these charges have been brought about is, I mean, it's a bit of a juggling act. It's trying to protect town centres as much as possible, and so the likes of Talacra Theatre, obviously they're financing places where people go to use different services. So given that in mind, I mean, I'm looking here a bit at the bigger picture, and I'd like to see us moving forward, looking at things like areas for camper vans, which will then tie in with the more vehicle charging points, more widely spread throughout the county, ideally. Mother and toddler, Councillor Jones mentioned this. I mean, you can imagine, I looked on Google Maps on Talacra, not Talacra, sorry, Tesco car park in Prestatyn, and I think for 7 mother and toddlers, it would take 11 ordinary places. But if that means that mother with her toddler then shops in Holywell or Prestatyn or Mould or anywhere else, instead of going to Broughton or out of town to Prestatyn or anywhere else, then it's probably a price long term that's worth paying for us to encourage everybody as much as possible to shop within Flintshire. And then it leads on to things like for Talacra and theatre in particular, but probably town centres, is sponsorships on the tickets, so that you buy your ticket at Theatre Clwyd, and then when you take your ticket in there, £2 off your meal if they'll do the deal with us with it, where they pay a bit then towards it. Then it encourages more people to use the service. Why not? We've mentioned this about businesses in Talacra where you could take your ticket in to an arcade and swap it for a go on a machine or something, whatever you do to get people in. And then just looking at here, there's Llandudno, they do nighttime parking as well, and that tying in with camper vans, and the fact that if they do it, there must be a way that they do it without it causing a problem. So probably for yourselves to have a look into with as policies are reviewed moving forward. So yeah, I think there's a lot that can be added to these policies moving forward. I know this here is about trying to generate some extra income, but the bigger picture is trying to make these as inviting as possible for the residents of Flintshire to shop and look in Flintshire for the services. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Jones.
Yeah, I mean, totally in agreement with Glenn. I think there's more we can do with the camper vans, stuff like that. I think that will come later. I'm particularly interested in this kind of idea of the mother toddler. I know it was something mentioned in Buckley Town Council, and sorry to mention them again, but it came through there. I'm just considering what Katie has said. We've already identified the 75,000 as a budget reduction within an item, and it's likely that this change that you're suggesting will have an effect on that number. So rather than specify a particular charge for a particular time, would it not be better to give the service? What I'm doing, I'm just looking at now at the Talacra example. Perhaps if they replicated the Talacra example completely, thereby increasing the 14-hour charge to £5, you might be able to. It might mitigate that loss of earnings. So, if you allow the service to think about how they do that, to try and find that shortfall in the money that may create, but finding it somewhere else that is fair within that same banding, is that fair to suggest?
Thank you for that. There was no further. Councillor Wakeman, and I'll come back.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Crease would shout at me if I didn't mention this. He's been pushing quite heavily for the camper van scene through Flintshire. We are like the gateway to North Wales and beyond. There are even companies out there that we could engage. They just need the land they will bring in all the infrastructure, all the monitoring, all the bookings, everything, and then give us, I think it's around 25% of the takings for the area. Councillor Crease has got all the details for this, and I'm sure he'd be happy. There's that much land in Flintshire that we own that does nothing at the minute. I'm sure the people are crying out. My own ward, there's 4 or 5 every weekend. There's 4 or 5 camper vans parked in the lay-bys, in literally on people's streets, and they're just wild camping. And that's the thing at the minute. People can't afford to go away. When this kind of thing, bringing it into, we've got the old Deeside Industrial Estate. There's a huge area there. You could put 40, 50 camper vans on there, in a ready-made structure, and it would, in essence, cost us nothing. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Right, no more speakers. We're going to move to the recommendation, but my recommendation 3 was going to be that consideration is given to an intermediate price for Theatre Clwyd, taken into the fact that the number of £1 charges may decrease and the number of £2, so they may offset each other in that way, as well as, but we don't know that. So what I'm saying is that I consider that the officers go away and consider bringing in an intermediate price that reflects theatre goers specifically in the evening, so it covers that time period without the, do I pay the cheap price or do I pay a far more expensive price? But we come to a sensible resolve in the middle if possible. So I haven't worded that perfectly correctly, but I think you know what I mean. And so that's my recommendation for 3 on that one, and it's been seconded. So so if we go to the recommendations on page 203, can we have a show of hands in favour of those recommendations that I've included? Okay, and online I can see, and those against? Just 1 against. So that's carried. Thank you very much for that. We've gone a bit longer than the 12 o'clock where we try to have a cut-off. Sorry for the officers that have been hanging around at this point, but we're going to now need to take a cut-off. And I do bear in mind that 2 members said they had to leave around 1 o'clock-ish. So can I recommend that we are back here at quarter to 1? That gives people 20 minutes to have a bit of a lunch break. Good afternoon. Welcome back to the Environment and Overview Scrutiny Committee. We shall swiftly move on to agenda item 7, which is a Pride in Place Investment Fund. And I'll hand straight over to Niall.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. So I'm just going to talk you through the Pride in Place Investment Fund and outline what the proposal is in terms of using that fund within Flintshire. It is another UK government fund. Obviously been in front of you a fair few times in the last year with different UK government funds. This one was launched at the end of 2025. It's a very short programme. It only runs in effect till March 27, so it's very, very short duration, just covers the 2 financial years, one of which we're obviously almost at the end of. It is pure capital funding. There's absolutely no revenue in the programme at all. We have been given an allocation of £1.5 million over those 2 years. The report in 101 sets out what the UK government's aims for the programme are. So there's community spaces, there's public spaces, and then also high streets and town centres. So the proposals we're going to bring before you today are focused within those 3 themes. UK government are happy for it to be spent on one of those priorities. They're happy to be spent on a single project. They're quite light touch, in fairness. The lack of revenue or capacity funding is a constraint. It's a significant constraint. Shared Prosperity Fund, we've spoken to you about a few times, that came with a management budget that allowed us to really reach out to the community to get their proposals and to support community groups to apply for funding. None of that is in place for this funding. And again, it's a pure capital programme, so it's a relatively short programme. Sorry, it's a relatively small programme with an extremely short duration. We also still have all the other programmes I've already spoken to you about. So Shared Prosperity Fund is still a thing, and it's a thing until September. We still have the investment zone, have for many, many more years. And we also have Local Growth Fund, which we haven't yet spoken to you about, but will be soon, also coming down the tracks at pace. So capacity is at an absolute premium at the moment. With that in mind, the proposal for the Pride in Place Impact Fund is that we fund council projects. So we don't try and open it up to the outside world. We fund internal projects. The reason for that is twofold. Firstly, that if we open it up to the outside world, we have to do an open call process. We did that for Shared Prosperity, and we did that extremely successfully. It's probably in the region of a 6-month journey to go through that process. This is a programme that's supposed to be being spent now, so we don't fundamentally have 6 months. And then when you have community projects that have been successful, you then have to manage the funding with those projects and help them fulfil the requirements of public sector funding, which is no small task. We have, for example, under Shared Prosperity Fund, a key fund, which provides grants to community groups, and that has 2 full-time members of staff looking after it. That's how much time it takes. This programme offers none of that opportunity. So the proposal is to take a pragmatic stance and to fund internal projects only. The report sets out what those projects are in 106 at a very high level. 3 of them will be very familiar to you after this morning's conversation, which is the refurbishments of the public toilets at Tlacra, Holywell and Mould. As you've already heard, that brings them up to a good standard, ready for their hopeful translation over to a community management structure through the town and community councils. So there is in total an allocation of £240,000 proposed for that. I should stress that those costs are very outlined at this stage. These are projects that have not yet been fully developed and not yet tendered, so just a health warning. Next on the list is the refurbishment of the all-weather pitch at Moldallion School, which is a very well-used community resource, but unfortunately has reached the end of its life, and so it needs to be replaced. So it's proposed to allow that replacement. The next one is Buckley. Buckley Streetscape, there's an allocation of £400,000 proposed, which will be matched against Transforming Towns money from Welsh Government to do a revamp of the High Street in Holywell, Brunswick Road as it is in Holywell. Sorry, beg your pardon, Buckley. I apologise. Again, not designed at this stage, not consulted at this stage. We're just getting the allocation of budget squared away, and then we can start that conversation with local stakeholders. And then we also have a shopfront grant proposed to cover all the towns. It's something we do whenever we get a pot of money, and it's extremely successful. We have a significant waiting list from businesses wanting to improve their shop fronts. And it's also a good way of us targeting empty properties and trying to bring those back into use as well. So we're proposing a £460,000 allocation for further shopfront grants, which will also bring in match funding from the businesses because they're required to submit 30% themselves. For those who've been totting that up quietly, you'll see that doesn't come to 1.5 million. There's a balance of about £250,000 left there. As I mentioned a moment ago, these are not firmed up costs. There is no spare money in the programme, and there is no spare money in the council. So what we want to do is get all those project proposals brought to quite a refined cost level, and we will see what's left. Hopefully, almost all of it, I suspect. And we are in discussion with our assets team about other assets that could make potential community asset transfers, and that £250,000 will be allocated to those to get those over the line, basically. So yes, that just takes you through the funding and how we're proposing to use it. There are 3 recommendations which I just want to explain for a second. The first one is obviously to support the approach to delivering the fund. The second is to give delegated authority to finalise those funding allocations, because of course the numbers I've presented to you are provisional at this stage, and to create the management systems to manage the programme effectively, given the lack of resources available. And then thirdly, this is a very, very short programme. We have to be extremely nimble with this kind of programme. So we want delegated authority to move money between the projects and add extra projects to make sure that we don't end in March 27 with any pennies left in the bank. We want to make sure every penny has been used. So delegated authority to enable that to take place. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. Any members? Councillor Chris Biffle.
Yes, thank you for the report, Niall. Okay, it's very, very welcome. we're making good use really of money that's available from the UK government and putting it to good purpose. And again, I certainly appreciate, given the previous conversation we've had today regarding the toilets, that money has been included in the scheme to upgrade those toilets in Mold, Holywell and Talacra, which will then make them possibly more acceptable really to those we pass these on to, those town and community councils, if they are so willing to take them over. They're now taking over a pig in a poke, as it were. They're taking over a purely newly refurbished toilet facility, which will make it probably more attractive to them and amenable in that sense. So thank you for considering that in this particular proposal. I'm just wondering what's included in this. For example, we discussed earlier on, didn't we, about the possibility of making a charge for the use of the toilet, which will help to defray the running expenses of them for those town and community councils, and will also deter people going in there to vandalise the toilets. They're less likely to less inclined, I would think, to pay for the privilege of vandalising the toilets or going in to use them for any other illicit purpose, which we want to deter. So I'm just wondering whether that could be included, for example, in the £30,000, or is that so actually ruled out in what's been prepared in terms of those particular funding sums that are projected there. Also, if I could ask, please, it mentions as one of the projects the refurbishment of the sports pitch at Mold Allen School. I'm just wondering which pitch we're talking about, where is it situated really on that site? If you could just expand on that, please, I'd be grateful.
In terms of the toilets, I'm not cited on the details, but I can pass that along to the street scene officer so that they can understand that that's a desire. That they'll be discussing that with the town and community councils, I'm sure, anyway, but I'll make sure that message gets along. And without knowing the location of the pitch, it's the 2G pitch at the Mold Allen School that's due to be replaced.
You can. 2G. 2G pitch. Thank you.
Councillor Wakelam wants to answer that.
The 2G pitch as you drive in is the large pitch to the left-hand side of it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Peters.
Right, thank you. And thanks for finding some money, Niall. I think we all welcome this. You know, just keep it coming. Yeah, I think it's quite a good idea where in 108 you've kept some back as mitigation. I would think so. That's a sensible thing to do. You don't want a project that's almost complete and you have to then dip into the council's own funding. So that's okay. We discussed the toilets before. Just interested that the refurbishment in Talacra is double the price of the refurbishment at Holywell, so perhaps it may be bigger. I don't know. It needs more work. If you just explain that, and naturally, you expect me to perhaps just mention Buckley. Okay, so there's an amount there to improve the appearance and the function of the town centre. So the detail of that, do you have something in mind, or is that something that you're going to discuss with the town council and allow the town council to put some proposals forward as well? We did have a presentation a few months ago about some funding for the town centre, which included the planters, and we felt that it wasn't value for money, and we'd rather sort of keep that money to one side. And I think it's proved right with this amount now. So just want to know how the projects within that will be decided, because we have some ideas to help with that. And the shop front grant scheme. I'm just wondering, you go through a number of towns in the evening, or perhaps on a Sunday when the shutters are down, and you know, everywhere is just grey. Everywhere is grey shutters. I know in Chester, when they have empty shops, they tend to sort of put murals on there that look like part of the street, if you like. So is there anything there where we could, you know, perhaps some people don't want it, but where you could put murals on these shutters to brighten up the town centre? You know, would that be part of that as well? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pearce. In terms of the Tlacqua toilets, I can see Ian's Bushel's hands up. You wanted to come in, Ian, on that one?
Yeah, if you don't mind. With regards to Hollywell, the building is quite substantial there, so there's no physical building works at Hollywell, so it's more of an internal refurbishment. Where down in Tlacqua, it's the removal and disposal of an old, quite a large mobile unit. There'd be a substantial groundworks with a brand new mobile unit placed back on top of the new foundations. So that's why there's quite a lot more cost involved with that. Mold is slightly lower again because it was refurbished 5 years ago. That's more of a light touch refreshment inside.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ian. In terms of Buckley and the streetscape, we are at, I suppose, point zero along that design process. We aim to have a scoping meeting with stakeholders in the near future, obviously subject to agreement of the funding both here and at Welsh Government, really as a pre-design piece of work, just to understand what we're trying to achieve and make sure that everybody's comfortable with that before we go into the design process. So that will involve conversations with the local elected members, both county councillors and at the town council, and also engagement with businesses and other stakeholders as well. It's critical that this is a once in a generation improvement to the town, funding willing, and we want to make sure that we get it absolutely right and everybody feels part of that. So hopefully that answers that question. In terms of the grants, we do, when we offer shopfront grants, try to discourage businesses from putting up shutters or replacing shutters because they have such a detrimental impact on the appearance of the town centre. We don't tend to offer a grant that's just the shutters. We tend to try and get a bit more of a wider impact, not least because for most of the day you can't see that there's any difference otherwise. So we try and ask for a more holistic look. But yes, that could involve replacement of shutters, for example, with a much more attractive version. The very traditional model you see is particularly unattractive, and there are much better versions out there. So we would, for example, fund a more attractive version of the shutters that allows the shop front to be seen. Allow the goods to be seen without that wall of metal that you currently unfortunately get. We have looked at those very short-term wrapping of shops, so you in fact put quite often it's vinyl wraps over the windows of the shops. We've struggled with capacity and also struggled to actually engage the owners of those shops. They can be quite reticent to do anything to their units, but again, that's something we can pick up and discuss a bit further. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Lloyd.
That was quick, thank you, Chair. Are the applications still open now? What is the time scale? You mentioned the time scale. Are the town council, obviously, I'm referring to Saltney again, trying to blow my own trumpet if you like, and we missed out on the town place-making plans. Were the town council made aware of this fund? Because I don't remember it coming up at the town council. They weren't. Well, if they weren't, why not? We have shop fronts. I think I did show you a few when you came round. So is it still open? Can applications still go in to get some of this funding? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Lloyd. We have, as I mentioned earlier, we have not done any process at all to invite applications in. These are all councils' projects on councils' assets. And that's because of the time involved and the capacity involved. We did an open call through Share Prosperity Fund. It was extremely successful, but that was a 6-month process. We are already at the end of the first financial year of this programme, and spend is expected imminently. So it precludes us offering the money to a third party. So every project on the list is an internal project. There's no money going to any other bodies, basically. So in terms of all the town councils, not one of them has been contacted about this. These are all county council projects. If the project is something that impinges on the town council, then obviously they'll have a conversation. In terms of shop fronts, this is not Welsh Government's money, so it's not part of the Transforming Towns programme. So I can't particularly see a problem with stretching the point to extend it to Saltney. I can raise that with the team if that's okay.
Thank you, Niall. So you said it's county council assets, so that would include the likes of community centre, which is
a county council asset, so it's a community centre. So could they apply, or I mean, what were they overlooked? I'm just thinking if we have a community centre and a youth club in Saltley, Sandy Lane, so which is very run down. I am actually on the committee there, and the windows and the roof having problems with it. So just wondering why that asset wasn't involved with this.
As I mentioned, we've got a reserve fund that's there for wider community assets beyond the list that's presented today. And I am in discussion with our assets team about which of those assets needs resource. There's a second part to that, though, because I think probably the answer is every asset needs some resource. That there needs to be also the capacity internally to manage a change to that asset as well. And the priority is for those ones that through that relatively modest investment could then become a community asset transfer. So the asset is no longer ours at the end of that process. It becomes somebody else's asset and fundamentally somebody else's problem potentially in the long term. It is no longer a recurring cost to the council. So that process is still ongoing. It's not a closed door, but there are some criteria really designed to fit the nature of this programme, which is it's extremely short term and has absolutely no management capacity built into it. So we have to be quite careful about what we let into the programme. So the answer is the door's not shut. There is a gap there for community asset projects, but only certain assets will make it, and it will be based on is there the capacity internally to manage the investment, and also is there a likely CAT at the end of it.
I just request that you take the community centre in Saltley into consideration then, please. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, any other questions from members? I just like to add that I remember when we had the shopfront grant scheme before, and a few shops in Shotton took up that offer. But there's a lot of shops that could do with it but don't take up the offer. Is that a communication issue, or can we put forward shops that we think should be visited to talk about improving their appearance?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, more than happy to hear if they're the ones that are a particular concern locally. We do bang on doors and talk to tenants and owners. It's not always easy. Fundamentally, we will only pay 70%, so the business has to find the remaining 30%, and that is a barrier, unfortunately, to businesses. Equally, we require them to have the consent of their owner, and that's not always forthcoming in a reasonable timescale. And sometimes, as you'll probably already be aware with regeneration projects, it takes a very, very long time. You know, we don't let people get away. We keep poking them, but sometimes we can be in discussion with an owner or tenant for 2 or 3 years before a project comes forwards. So it can be a very, very slow process. But you know, we do have we do speculatively call businesses, but if there are ones that are of particular concern, then we're happy to speak to them. We probably already have, I suspect, but happy to hear of others.
Okay, thank you. Nobody else indicated, so if I can move to the recommendations on page 31. 3 recommendations there. Can I have a mover? Moved, seconded, and can I have a show of hands to all those in favour? That's carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, Niall. Okay. Moving on to your agenda item 8 now, which is tree inspections code of practice. Can I hand over to the Chief Officer?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Members, excuse me, will be aware that we have a liability as a council and responsibility for all of the trees that are within our land ownership. And the code of practice before you today outlines the inspection regime to minimise our liabilities in that regard. I've got Stuart Body here, our tree officer, who will walk you through that report. Thank you, Chair.
Oh, sorry about that. I'll just read through from my notes, Chair, if that's okay. The Code of Practice for the Inspection of Trees details how the Council assesses and maintains its trees in accordance with a risk-based approach and is primarily aimed at meeting the duty of care in UK law. The Code of Practice firstly covers the important benefits of trees provide to society and supporting biodiversity, and recognises the low overall risk that trees actually present. However, it should be recognised that despite the low overall risk, the risk from one tree to another can vary greatly depending on the tree's location, its size and its condition. Tree risk assessment involves zoning sites with trees according to their level of occupancy. Typically, sites that have a high level of use by the public will be zoned as high occupancy, and those with less frequent use, but not a low level of use, as medium occupancy. Trees in high and medium occupancy zones are then subject to periodic inspections that record the position of a tree, its size and its condition to determine the overall risk for the tree. Trees that are identified as being hazardous and likely to cause harm or damage are identified for remedial action such as pruning or removal. Figure 1 of the Code of Practice identifies the zones of greatest risk in red, with medium risk in yellow and low risk in green. To effectively manage the risk and meet its duty of care, the Council must focus on the trees in the red and yellow areas in Figure 1. Trees on low or negligible occupancy land do not need to be subject to proactive arboricultural inspections because they are much likely to cause harm or damage if they fail. Table 1 shows how the Council's services have been zoned according to their level of occupancy, and Table 2 states the period between proactive arboricultural inspections. Chapter 8 explains how the services responsible for the majority of the Council's trees look after them. Chapter 9 covers the maintenance and inspection of trees within the adopted public highway where the Council is the duty holder. The chapter also sets out how the Council may use its powers to deal with trees on private land that have been identified as being an unacceptable risk to highway users. The remainder of the Code of Practice includes the competency of inspectors and level of inspections. Appendix 5 summarises 7 legal cases which have informed the contents of the Code of Practice. It is important to note that whilst tree risk assessments are a necessary part of tree management, the Council's overarching tree management policies are set out in the Urban Tree and Woodland Plan. The plan aims to sustainably manage trees and increase canopy cover. It is recommended that members note the contents of the Code of Practice and agree its formal adoption.
Thank you very much for that, Stuart. Do we have members' questions? Councillor Pearce?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just getting the computer back on. Probably your hard copy, Dennis, my computer screen's just off at the moment. Yeah, thank you for that, Stuart. I don't think we've had a report like this in front of us for quite some time. So, yeah, on the face of it, many trees could appear to be sound, but it would be impossible to determine whether that tree would be safe or unsafe if we had a severe storm. What I'm driving at is that if we did have a severe storm and a tree was blown over and its roots exposed, the council wouldn't be responsible for that through normal risk, would it? Like as if a bough or something was detected as potentially dangerous. So in the event of storm damage, is the council absolved from any issues about that? How do we cope with storm damage? And secondly, if we take a road, particularly like Tinkersdale between, say, Dobshill and Newlow, the winding road where the trees are both sides and form a canopy, how would they be assessed? Because I would imagine most of those are part of the Gladstone estate, but would impact the highway. So I think that's a good example to try and explain how you would look at that to mitigate the problems, because the road sometimes does get closed because of the debris on the road from storms, etc. So I'm just wondering how those sort of inspections would take place. Thank you.
I think you're right that the trees through Tinkersdale belong to Harden Estates, and therefore the council hasn't got a duty of care in relation to those trees.
Even though they're related, it would impact the highway.
That's right, yes. They don't have the duty of care. The council, as a highways authority, have a policy of picking up on trees which represent an unacceptable risk on private land, and there's a procedure under section 154 of the Highways Act to notify landowners of their dangerous trees. As you probably will know, we can follow that through with a notice and carry out the work. The main thrust of the code of practice is really to focus on the council's trees where we do have the duty of care, and there will be trees along the highway verges which fall into the public highway or are in the public highway where we have the duty. But as you say, Tinkersdale is largely private land.
And the storm damage.
Yeah, I think what you were alluding to in your first question was there is such a thing as bad luck and an act of God. If the council has inspected a tree and the inspection has been done thoroughly and there's no work recommended, then in the event it does fall and that wasn't foreseeable, then the council, even though it's the landowner, is not liable for any claim.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Rose.
Thanks. One thing I couldn't see in the code of practice or in the urban tree and woodland plan is what is done with the felled trees. Obviously, there's a biosecurity section, which obviously, ash dieback trees aren't included in the question really. But is there a default policy of chopping and dropping and leaving trees where they are when felling or thinning? Or do we have a set thing that we do with those with the wood that's felled, especially if any of this is contracted? Is there a default that we advise them to do? And in the section on competencies, do we have all those levels in-house, including up to the section that says, they've got to use detectors and things within trees? Or again, does that have to be outsourced, and how often is that needed and necessary? And then finally, obviously, we do a lot of work on properties and then claim funds back. Does that mean there's an opportunity to actually have a commercial element there in terms of, as we're already sort of claiming and charging, to just do the work and invoice them rather than have to go through courts to get the money when they say, yes, please do it? Do we do that by default, or is there an opportunity there? Thanks.
I'll deal with the arisings first. We employ contractors most of the time, and they will price to clear the timber, logs, chips, and therefore that will be considered in the price. We don't have a timber station. Competencies: we don't have the equipment to carry out advanced tree inspections using decay detection equipment. Denbighshire have some equipment, and we have an arrangement where just the other day some of the tree officers visited and carried out a decay detection test on a sycamore in Harden, but typically they would only be carried out once every 3 years. And I think the other one was competencies with rising.
Commercial.
Well, basically, when we serve a section 154 notice, it's up to the landowner to sort the tree out. It's not the council's tree. It's recognised that there's a danger to the highway, and we prompt the landowners to do it. And we do recharge for that. That's what we are required to do for auditing purposes. We don't offer to fell trees for a contract price. That would be competing with the local contractors.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Rose, are you content with that?
One query on terms of the risings then. Obviously, if we if we organise to remove the arisings, is that not going against some of the biodiversity duties in terms of leaving it there for the resourceful things? Obviously, a lot of the environmental organisations have moved to a chopping and dropping scenario to make certain that that resource doesn't disappear and supports increased biodiversity.
I mean, the Countryside Service will, you know, strip out trees and leave them as a stick, you know, for woodpeckers, and leave habitat paths. Clearly, that wouldn't be appropriate in the school, for instance, or civic area.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Okay, thank you. Councillor Alan Marshall.
Diolch yn fawr, Cadeirydd. Just got a query. You mentioned that the council's got a duty of care for all trees on its land. We had an issue in my ward where there was a couple of trees growing on sort of sheltered bungalows in the garden in front of it, and there was an adjoining footpath. So the trees were owned by housing, and the footpath was owned and managed by Street Scene. And the trees raised the footpath so that it was a trip hazard. It took 3 years nearly. I continuously reported it. There seemed to be some communication issue between Street Scene and housing to do something about it. Eventually, a resident tripped and broke her ankle. And a few weeks later, the footpath got dug up and repaired. So can you sort of assure me that these sort of things of, like, you got Street Scene and housing, because the residents, they just see it's one council, not two separate departments, that those issues don't exist anymore? Thank you.
I accept that, you know, we're a big council of various departments, and sometimes things are a bit fragmented. Valuation estates and housing, we don't currently have a system of tree inspection in place. I think the Code of Practice refers to the actions of roots briefly, and in the day-to-day inspections, proactive arboricultural inspections for higher occupancy areas, something like root lifting tarmac would be picked up and noted for action.
Okay, happy with that response, Councillor Marshall? No? Okay, that's good.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Right, we'll move to the recommendation on page 37. Members agree to the adoption of the Code of Practice for the inspection of trees as an operational document. Can I have a mover? Moved, seconded. Have a show of hands, those in favour. That's unanimously carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, Stuart. Okay, we're moving now on to agenda item 10, which is the grass cutting, ground maintenance and weed control, and I'll hand over to Katie.
Thank you, Chair. I've still got Ian Bushell as well, who's the Highway Operation Manager, under which grass cutting sits within his remit. So Ian's still online as well, there to answer some questions at the end. So we bring this report, it's a regular report that we bring to you on an annual basis to review our performance for the previous season. And I'm conscious, obviously, that Scrutiny, this particular Scrutiny Committee have requested an update as well on weed control over the summer period. So we've included that within the report. And we also give some details on the preparations for the forthcoming season, which starts on the 1st of March. So in terms of our current grass cutting policy, the policy itself was actually approved in March 2023 and last reviewed in January 2025, and you can find a copy of that policy within Appendix 1. And that policy change at the time was made to try and bring more focus on biodiversity in grassland management, and also a targeted reduction in the use of glyphosate because of the carcinogenic properties and potential harm to health and wildlife. So the main changes with that policy are detailed in section 1.02. Then cover some of the legislation that we're governed by in terms of managing grasslands, and we have to strike a balance between trying to improve the wildlife and biodiversity, but also managing safety as well. So there is a fine line between balancing all those pieces of legislation for us. In 1.08, we give you some details then of how we currently deliver grass cutting operations, and it's through a range of contracted services as well as delivering services in-house, as you can see there. 1.09 then details the frequency standards for the different types of grass cutting operations that take place across the county. And then we've obviously got, there are, some details there around it's different for, once per year for rural verges, 4 times per year for urban verges and visibility displays. Whereas, amenity areas are done, we've got 13 cuts a year. So certain places are done more frequently than others, depending on footfall and where they are in terms of safety. We're very heavily governed by the weather, and there will be periods in between grass cutting cuts where favourable weather conditions, such as warmer temperatures, the humidity and rainfall, as well as the increased UV light, particularly at the start of the summer, can have a huge impact on grass growth and can cause it to grow more rapidly. So we don't provide specific dates for when certain areas will be cut because it does depend on the weather conditions, and it also depends on how fast the grass grows as well. But we generally aim for the frequency standards that are listed in 1.09. So in terms of a review of our performance in 2025, we actually commenced grass cutting during the week of the 3rd of March last year. So we always aim for the beginning of March each season. So we were on track last year. And that was helped by the drier and colder than average weather at the time, and it wasn't wet. So we were really fortunate that it was quite dry at the time. So it helped us to have a good start on time. We also finished later than the previous year, and we didn't finish grass cutting operations till the end of October last year. And each of the rounds completed between 8 and 9 cuts over the whole season. Previous years, we have seen a reduction in the resources available for grass cutting operations, and we operated all of the rounds generally with a 4-crew team for the duration. We did see an overlap at the start of the season because of winter maintenance, because it tends to happen every year with March, April and October, where we're still having to grit the roads, but we're also starting grass cutting operations. So we use the same drivers and operatives for grass cutting as we do with gritting. So there is always that overlap. So it can impact us at the start and end of season. In terms of the climate and weather at the start of the season, as I said, we had exceptionally dry conditions with high pressures dominating generally, which led to below average rainfall and meant that we were able to get ahead to a certain extent in terms of grass growth. That enabled us then to start concentrating resources on manually clearing weeds in certain areas, which did help us. You can see a summary of the number of cuts and the progress throughout the season in the grass cutting dashboard in Appendix 2. Then we go through the summer. We did see persistent warm weather then, which did actually affect some of the weed growth as we went into the summer, and we did start to get some complaints and more requests about weed clearance in certain areas. We have found that I'm by no means an expert, and I know that Ian's online, but we have found that extreme heat and drought can certainly stress some plants, but there are certain weeds that actually favour drought as well, and actually can tolerate it, and that then affects their distribution as well. That said, we had the weed spraying quad bike this year, which we operated every week throughout the season. But we did find that the new way weed treatment wasn't as effective as the chemical options that we've used previously. And As a result, we ended up having to allocate resources to go and manually scrape and clear the weeds in certain areas from the curb edges. And this is particularly resource heavy and takes a lot longer than obviously spraying. As I mentioned, in terms of our resources, we are stretched. We had 400k taken out of the budget year before last for grass cutting. So we are running on reduced numbers within the teams. And as I said, they're 4 crew teams, whereas previously we've always had 5. So we have seen that has had an impact in terms of our ability to maintain the pace, particularly when we have weather issues as well. That said, we still operate over 1,000 sites. We've got 1,030 sites for grass cutting, 16 cemeteries, and over 850 gardens for the assisted gardening scheme. So although we have seen a reduction in our resources, the number of sites hasn't reduced at all. So we are still, having to maintain expectations in terms of what we can deliver. Some of the changes that we've seen that we made between 24 and 25 have made a huge difference to service delivery for us this year. One of the big changes was the new tractor and new gang mower, which we had external capital funding for from Welsh Government. That's had a huge improvement in terms of being able to, some of the areas we use it is on the football pitches and parks, and we're able to cut those more often. We also, with the help of colleagues in the biodiversity team, we were able to bid for a further second smaller tractor with funding from Local Places for Nature, which again, we were able to use on the football pitches and parks, and it ensured we didn't have any complaints last year. We also used that smaller tractor to collect the wildflower at the end of the season as well, so it had double benefit. Cemetery maintenance, we didn't get any complaints around cemetery maintenance last year. We were able to stay on top of the number of cuts, and we were able to ensure that we got ahead of the schedule at the start of the season, which was a real help because of the weather. We said we'd bring back a bit of a review of all the trials that have gone on for different types of weed treatment. So within 1.17, there's quite a lot within there. I'm not going to go through them all in detail, but we have continued to look for alternatives to the chemical pesticides. We've tried different products and methods, from spray alternatives to biodegradable weed killers. You've got the foam stream, the hot foam treatments. And then we've looked at machine weed dripping and also the manual hand weeding as well. But what we have found is that, some of the non-glyphosate weed killers, like the vinegar and the acetic acid-based treatments, they're okay for young annual weeds, but they can struggle with the deep-rooted perennials, things like ragworts, and they require more application and repeated application, whereas before they don't always tackle the roots. They tend to burn the leaves, dehydrate them, don't actually kill the plants. So the only alternative at that point is for us to actually manually rip the plants and root out. So that's what we've been doing in some cases. We've obviously we've got different types of mechanical weed rippers. We've got a walk behind. We've also been using the small sweepers with weed brushes on them as well. And then our grass cutting gangs have also been out manually ripping as well as our cleansing teams. So overall, yes, the organic herbicide treatments allowed a rapid coverage of large areas, but again, they didn't achieve the same level of effectiveness as the glyphosate-based products. Although the mechanical and hand scraping methods were effective in removing some of the visible weed growth, they didn't remove the root system. So it's that, I don't think there's no one size fits all, unfortunately, because it depends on the type of weeds that are growing and the number of applications. It's obviously more time consuming and more resource heavy because we're having to go back and reapply those treatments. And they, therefore, for that reason, can be more expensive as well. Some positives, we've continue to work collaboratively with the biodiversity team in Place and Growth. We've got really, really good support from them in terms of identifying any funding opportunities for new plant and equipment, being able to advise on, the types of alternatives that are available, and also they've helped significantly with public engagement and some of the training and education as well for our own crews. We also work very closely with housing communities with the assisted gardening scheme, and that we have a really, really well-established and well-established team that work very, very closely with housing now, and have built up that rapport with the tenants and knowledge in terms of the locations and the properties that they maintain. As a consequence of that, we've been able to ensure that no properties have to wait more than 2 weeks to be added to the schedule when they join it. So our response times have improved significantly in terms of that aspect. That the teams there have achieved 13 cuts over the whole season, and that then enabled us to take on additional work over the winter season for hedge cutting as well for housing. In terms of the next steps, in terms of our planned preparations for this season, obviously we start in earnest on 1st of March. We have been undertaking cold cuts both last month and this month to try and help us get ahead where it's feasible. We will continue to allocate more sites to be left to return to natural meadow, and we'll work very closely with the biodiversity team to identify those, and it will only be done where it's safe to do so. And that's in addition to the wildflower sites that we already have. We'll also make sure that we do the 1 metre cut around those areas to highlight that they've been left deliberately in that way, so that they're not forgotten. And we'll look at little posts as well to say that, indicate that those are wildflower areas or they're natural meadow areas. So we will do those kinds of things. Currently looking at further options around weed control. We've had some demos for what we call a multi-hog weed removing sweeper, and an Avant multi-loader with a weed brush head. So fleet services are busy trying to find alternatives for us to trial. We're also working with the biodiversity team to research alternatives to the weed spray that we currently use. Another bid we're putting in this year is for a second quad pike. So if we do continue to use non-glyphosate alternatives, if we had the second quad pike, that would help us with certainly doing repeated applications and having to go back instead of relying on just the one quad bike. So that will help us. Obviously, if we did, if you wanted to go back to using glyphosate, it is only licensed in the UK till December this year. So that's an issue for us. So it wouldn't be feasible, and we've no idea whether the UK government were going to relicense it. But it would require a policy change and obviously a risk assessment because of the carcinogenic properties. Again, we will always look for alternatives in terms of grant funding to help us with our operations, whether it's equipment, whether it's different alternatives to weed control. So we will always do that. We're also trying to reduce the reliance on temporary agency staff because we tend to backfill our team sizes because we have a reduction. We need more resources in the summer than we do in the winter. So again, that if we can try and look at more fixed term posts instead of using agency staff, that would help us as well. So we're looking at those things. And again, we will always look to try and revise our schedules as we go along as well, and try to expand public awareness of biodiversity. We have included within the recommendations an additional recommendation around trying to understand what the public's perception is on biodiversity and managing grasslands. So we are proposing that we undertake that because it would help us, with any future review of the policy. So that is one proposal we are looking at. We have included the other two contracted areas. So highway verges is one of them, which we last procured in 2024 for 2 years, and had the option of a 1 year plus 1 year extension. So we're actually in the start of the first year of the extension this season. No issues last season. The contractor performed well, and we had minimal complaints regarding highway verges. The school grounds contract is another one, again, which we manage on behalf of the education and youth portfolio. The contract runs well, no issues identified. We had minimal complaints from the schools this season, and again, we're about to review whether we go into the extension period with that contract as well. That's the report in a nutshell. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Katie. Just with that option 3, recommendation 3, it seems to be in 2 parts with regard to the weed control and then the consultation on biodiversity and approaches to managing grassland. Is the consultation going to be about weed control as well?
Potentially, yeah. I think it's looking at what are people's views generally around weeds. It's a generational thing, isn't it? Younger people want to see the birds and the bees thrive, and are they as bothered about weeds as everybody else? So I think we want to get some feedback. Just a lot of what we're seeing in terms of complaints. Is it an aesthetics issue, or is it generally a safety issue? We don't actually know. So I think we need to undertake some research ourselves just to understand what is the public perception of weeds generally, and the fact that we may not be able to use glyphosate products in the future. So how do people feel about that? We don't know really. We're open to suggestions of what the consultation should include. So it's very much something that needs to be drafted over the summer months, I think, ahead of next year's programme.
No, I think a thorough consultation on that with the public understanding what's actually involved with the glyphosate and other options. And I think it may help as councillors when we try to explain to constituents what's going on and why. And if it was in some form of consultation, I think it'd be very good. Okay, Richard Lloyd.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Katie. That's very thorough report, that, isn't it? It takes some computing, really. I've got no problem with the grass cutting on the verges. I think that works okay. But like probably every other council and every other area, the main complaints we get is about the weeds at the curbside. That is the upside. I have seen the quad bike, I think once, but he went that fast, and it was a bit like that. I don't really think it did any good. It didn't kill any weeds. I don't think they covered estates, but that is the main complaint we get over weeds. Not on grassland, that's fine there, but on the curbside, just looks so unsightly. And I do hope we can come up with something to solve that problem for this year. I don't know what the answer is, and I actually physically go out with a spade down the road to the bridge and back and clean the weeds out the curbside myself. Sometimes I think that's the only way to do it, but it is labour intensive, so I appreciate that. So yeah, if we could improve that, the weeds on the curbside, that would please a lot of my residents, the same as everywhere else. Thanks.
Councillor Rose.
Thanks. Thanks for the report. Lots of detail in there. I do very strongly agree that the removal of glyphosate was an important decision and one we shouldn't go back on, whether the government relicense it or not. Glyphosate was initially tried to be banned by the EU, who delayed the licensing decision and extended it due to reports that were funded by the pesticide manufacturers that weren't released into the public domain, so didn't allow public scrutiny. And obviously, since we've left, since Brexit, the extended regulations for ourselves, we've got until December 26, as you said, but that's from the Health and Safety Executive. So that's not just about our our residents. That's also about our staff and things that are using these products on a daily basis, because the WHO's own body for Agency for Research on Cancer declared it a genotoxic, meaning it can damage DNA, which causes cancers. It's a carcinogenic to animals, and it's also a probable carcinogenic for humans. So with that in mind, I don't think we should be putting that anywhere that isn't specifically necessary to remove, for example, Japanese knotweed if it's necessary for that, but I know there's stronger ones that are used on those. I think the query on some of the things that we've used, Pesticide Action Network, PAC UK, you'll know about. One of the options they suggest is called Electricide, and it's a device which uses electricity, and that electricity is supposed to go down into the root to kill the root as well. Now, I don't know what area that is in terms of how broad an application it is, or what necessary details are, but I think that'd be an interesting one if that one is to kill deeper rooted elements, unlike the foam streamer. In terms of the consultation, obviously, I agree with what's been said in terms of expanding that out in terms of including some education in the consultation. Because obviously, although some people may want an aesthetic view, and I agree, generationally, older people want everywhere to look like a bowling green, whereas a lot of the younger generation are quite happy to see any flowers to support nature loss. But one of the things with that is obviously there's a lot of environmental organizations that have already done a lot of research on these things. Is it worth speaking to Bionet first to see what research is there, see if they have any input to it, or whether there's questions we don't need to ask because the research has already been developed. Along with that, I think if there is people complaining about things in that consultation, we really should be asking them to pin on a map where they mean, because I really do think there'll be hotspots, and what they're asking for is not a generic county-wide. It's literally the verge outside their house that frustrates them. It's not overall. So it could be that there's actually a bit more detail in a consultation that specifically looks at the areas that are causing the most complaints, rather than generically, we want this to happen all over. Because I think it'd be, the more populated the town, the more likely they are to not expect weeds than some of the rural areas. So yeah, I think that's my comments on those, but I'm in supportive of most of the things we've done so far. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Marshall.
Diolch yn fawr, Cadeirydd. A few months ago, I asked for the policy to be updated due to the change, because it was mentioning 30-mile-an-hour zones, so that the urban was within 30 mile an hour. Of course, we've now got 20-mile-an-hour zones as well. So I expected the change to be to reduce it from 30 to 20, so that was a built-up area for restricted roads. Now on this one, it's extended it to 40 mile an hour, which in my ward adds another couple of miles probably of roadside in which there's going to be additional grass cutting, more frequent. My residents will be very happy, but on the basis that they said there was restricted resources available, we're now increasing the amount of grass cutting. So was that the intention? The second thing I've got is regarding the when the grass is cut. In elevated wards like mine, spring and summer come later in the year than down, say, in Mold. An indication is the elderflower trees. You can see in Mold the elderflower trees start flowering, and in my ward it's 2 weeks later, and then also the summer is shorter as well. So I've seen outside my house the grass cutting happened, say, in the first week in August, and nothing is being cut at all. So the tractor is out all day cutting absolutely nothing. So I reckon that, you should have a look of where the elevation is and say, well, we'll do mold or low-lying areas first week in April, and do was like mine last week in April. So yeah. Sorry, I'm just reading this. Next one is the 4, which is hedges. It says here the majority of highway hedges are responsibility of the adjacent landowner. We have lots of problems with overgrown hedges in my ward. The hedges aren't maintained, the leaves fall on the ground, they block the footpath, the leaves run into the gullies, block those up, they block the culverts up, and the landowner isn't cutting them, so it's costing the council a lot of money, and it takes time for the council to actually get out. There's one stretch of road in which I must have complained about it regularly for about a year. Eventually, it was done, but the hedge wasn't cut because it was the landowner's responsibility. So the footpath was done. Regard number 6, village town gateways. I take it those are the gateways up to the white gate as you enter the village. My community council pays somebody to cut that section of about 10 meters outwards. And the last time I saw the council workers cut the grass, they didn't cut that area at all. They cut everywhere else, but not that part. So even in here, it says the council's meant to cut that.
Councillor Marshall, you've muted yourself.
Did you hear me say anything?
Yes, we heard most of that. It was only the last sort of 10 seconds.
All right. Okay. Yeah, the last one was about the village town gateways. Our community council pays for somebody to do that, and I've seen the last time grass was cut, the council workmen didn't even touch that area. So the council meant to do it, but they're not. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mike, please.
Right, thank you for that report. Clarified quite a few items. I'm just looking at page 186, section 102, about the main change includes reduced mowing on all suitable verges. Well, I'm in support of that. I might have mentioned this at a previous meeting. 2 or 3 years ago, Sarah Slater contacted us asking about would we like some wildflowers on the grass verges in the community. And I said, well, yeah, that would be okay. Have you got any suitable areas? Yes, we did. Those wildflowers, they were magnificent, but they lasted one season. Once they finished, they were left for quite a long time, and it looked rather unsightly when you compared it to a nicely mown grass verge. But we had the benefit of the wildflowers. Eventually they were cut down, but we didn't have them the following year. We just had a grass verge again, and I would have thought if we're going to plant wildflowers, they should at least be perennials. So as we approach the spring again, we would expect them to grow, and you wouldn't have to worry about cutting the grass verge. And there are some other grass verges in the community which would be suitable as well. So I'm thinking, well, yeah, it's okay saying we're not going to cut the grass verge, but if we've got nothing else there, it doesn't really, there's no benefit. So I'm saying is that where we have grass verges not cutting, let's make sure we've got some perennial wildflowers. I'm not an expert on biodiversity, but I think people recognise when they see the wildflowers compared to a bare grass verge. It looked really good. Right, on page 190 and 191, it gives a summary of the different methods of treatments that's being applied, 1 to 6. And then we have the overall findings, and then we have a summary. But the summary really isn't conclusive. It doesn't tell me which was the preferred one for the council. It seems to me it's different treatments for different situations. And when we look at Appendix 1, I think it goes on from what the chairman was saying. We look at Appendix 1, we have a grass cutting policy with timescales and actions. We haven't got that here for weed control, and I think we need that. For example, going through the report itself, I pick up young annual weeds, deep-rooted weeds, established perennial weeds, and heavy weed growth. So I'm thinking you could have a table with all these descriptions in and their locations, because you might say, well, people don't mind the weeds. Well, I mind them where they're in the gutters of the roads, making the place look untidy. So I think we need a weed control policy similar to the grass cutting policy, with all the different types of weeds listed, the locations. You can look at the pros and cons of using different methods of removal. For example, it tells me that the hot foam couldn't be used on busy roads because of the trailer they have with it. So I think that the outcome of this report, I do think we need a paper on weed control policy, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wakeland.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Katie, for the report. I don't envy you on this, the weed control part. I mean, similar to Councillor Richard next to me, when I cut my lawn, I do the bit outside my house as well, the road, the footpath, everything, and quite a few people I'm encouraging to do the same, just all adds in. And I'm after some advice more than anything else. On the 1.08, it says hedges in-house. Many hedges in my ward are farm owned and are cut by the farmers, but I have issues where I've got vast housing estates have been built, and the hedgerows on farmland, the hedgerows were bought as part of the land being taken over. Now, on one side of them, you've got the people's houses and fences, and it doesn't matter. But lots of the bordering land, sort of footpaths and bridle paths and that kind of stuff, the rights of way control the floor, but the sides are just nothing's done with them anymore because nobody takes ownership for them. What can you help, basically? Any ideas?
Okay, that was all the speakers. Katie, do you want to come back on anything?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of hedges, it depends on the location and who the landowner is. So, you know, I can't really talk generically because it does depend. Excuse me. It could be private, it could be the developer, it could be another council department. So it really does depend on the location. Sorry, my voice is going. But I think, yeah, I mean, in summary, also to what Councillor Mike Pearce said, was there isn't, you know, I said earlier on, there's no one size fits all here for all the different scenarios. You could try and write a policy, but you probably wouldn't cover it all. We do have to approach each situation differently depending on, you know, the type of plant that's growing there. It does depend on where it's growing and how pervasive it is, or whether it's an invasive species and so on. So, you know, that's why, you know, we've trialed all of these different types, and there isn't one solution for everything, unfortunately, as you had previously. So it is a combination of all of these, which obviously is more time consuming, requires repeated application, and therefore could be seen as more expensive because it's more resource heavy. So that's a summary of where we're at, unfortunately. And until we know really what's happening beyond December 26, it's difficult to take a decision, I think, at this stage. So we are proposing to go out to public consultation and get, see what the public think about how we approach things in Flintshire. Understand what their perception is of, how the situation we're in, where we can't go ahead with glyphosate, and policy decision was taken a few years ago, but understand that there are limitations with the current alternatives as well.
Okay, thank you. I mean, with the recommendations on 185, as long as that number 3 thoroughly considers consultation inclusive of weed control, not just about biodiversity and grasslands, I'm happy with that. But Councillor Pearce, did you want to make any adjustment or amendment to that recommendation?
Well, I just say really that when we look at it, I agree with the Chief Officer that, different types of weed removal are applicable to certain situations. And I think that, we do need something to guide us. For example, the most unsightly things we see in the town is the weeds growing from the gutter. So out of the various methods, there must be one which is preferable to deal with that. And all the different methods would have their own situations. So I think we could perhaps draw up a draft policy just so we could see that, because the summary doesn't really summarize what of the 6 possibilities we could have for weed control. It doesn't link them to any particular area. So when I come onto the council, like I did some time ago with the area coordinator, it was either last year or the year before, and he said, "Oh, we can't use the chemicals. We'll have to use something else." So we would need to know, well, which way you're going to do it. If it is manually intensive, well, that is the way it needs to be done, or you develop something that's going to be more cost effective. But at the moment, we have a policy for the grass cutting, but we have nothing for the weed control. So I think as a scrutiny, we just ask the opposite. Could she consider drafting? It doesn't have to be, a massive document. As I said, you could have a table with the different treatments and the different areas, the pros and cons of using it, and then just sort of recommend one. So when the local member comes up and say, "Look, I've got a big problem with the weeds in the gutter here," and you look through, yeah, we can use that one. It just, and members of the public as well, they say, "Well, what's wrong with I can't clean the weeds." Well, we're not allowed to use this chemical anymore. Well, what are you going to use? I said, I don't really know. So I think we just need some guidance like that. Thank you.
Do you want to come back, Katie?
Yeah, that's fine. I think what we'll probably do then, obviously subject to when we're going to have to bring back the outcome of the public consultation as well, so we can bring a draft policy back at that time, at the same time with the feedback from the public consultation, if that's acceptable to the committee.
Yeah, okay, Councillor Lloyd.
Yeah, just following on from Councillor Pearce, really. Looking at 109, we've got a frequency of cutting the grass here, and I'd like to see a frequency of the weed control, really, because that's not in there, is it? And if we could see something like that, we would know. We'd know when they've been, and what they're due. We could tell the residents, oh, they're due next week or the week after. But there's nothing in there to tell us a frequency of when they're going to do the weed control on the curbside. If that would be possible
I can imagine that being a lot more difficult to manage, but but maybe as Katie's agreed to accept that, we'll do this consultation, and on the back of that we'll have some sort of weed control policy. Okay, with that in mind, added to that, the recommendations on page 185 can be moved. I seconded, and all those in favour? That's fully carried. Thank you very much. Okay, we move to what is now agenda item 12, and this is a part 2 item. And so can we have it moved and seconded that exclusion of press and public. Moved and seconded. Those in favour? That's carried. Can we stop the webcast?